The Springfield nuclear power plant has two cooling towers. You have seen them hundreds of times. They appear in the opening credits of every single episode, rising over the surrounding landscape before a single character has spoken, trailing slow columns of vapor into whatever passes for sky in Springfield on any given day. They are among the most recognized pieces of animated architecture in the history of American television. Before Homer nearly gets caught in the closing garage door, before Marge finishes the grocery shopping, before Bart skateboards past the school, before the family rushes for the couch and the couch gag lands, before all of that, every single week you see the towers. They are cracked. That detail arrives in the show so casually, folded into a list of safety violations that the show treats as comedy material rather than genuine cause for alarm, that it barely registers for what it actually is. The Springfield nuclear power plant has accumulated 342 individual safety violations, 342 distinct, documented failures to meet the minimum regulatory standard required to operate a nuclear facility without inflicting environmental harm on the surrounding community. The estimated cost to bring the plant into compliance to repair what is broken and address what is actively dangerous is $56 million. Mr. Burns declines to spend it. Not because the sum is prohibitive. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and $56 million is, relative to his accumulated fortune, a rounding error. He declines because spending that money would constitute an acknowledgement that the problems exist, and acknowledging that they exist would open a door, legal, regulatory, journalistic, through which someone could walk and start asking questions. Questions about what 342 violations over several decades have already done to the people living downwind of those cracked cooling towers. Questions about the water. Questions about the children who have been drinking that water since they were born. Burns cannot allow those questions. So the violations remain. The cracks stay cracked. Springfield keeps drinking. The violations are not abstract regulatory shortcomings. The show makes them specific, and their specificity matters. Radioactive waste dumped directly into local waterways. Radioactive material deposited on children's playgrounds. Plutonium used as a paperweight on someone's desk inside the facility itself. Cooling towers patched with chewing gum, literal gum, removed from someone's mouth and pressed into structural failures in equipment designed to contain the byproducts of nuclear fission. Rats moving through the underground sections of the facility that glow visibly in the dark, their biology already demonstrably altered by whatever they have been living next to. And in the basement of this operating nuclear power plant, human skeletons. The show introduces this detail in the context of a running list and immediately moves to the next item. Human bones in the basement of a working reactor facility. The episode does not explain who they were, how old the remains are, what combination of events produced them, or why no regulatory body has investigated the presence of human remains inside an active nuclear plant. No character questions it. No follow-up episode revisits it. The skeletons appear as a data point in a safety inspection, and then recede into the background of a town that has developed a highly practiced capacity for accepting extraordinary information without pursuing it further. The show shows you the bones and keeps moving. Springfield keeps moving. Nobody looks back. The man responsible for preventing all of this, the person whose specific professional title is safety inspector, whose daily function is to ensure this facility does not poison the community around it, is Homer Simpson. The show's creator has stated in various interviews that Homer's IQ measures at approximately 55. A measured IQ of 55 places a person in a range that clinical frameworks classify as a significant intellectual disability. It is a level of cognitive impairment that would typically prevent the execution of the complex procedural requirements that nuclear safety monitoring demands. Beyond that baseline, we learn across the course of the series that Homer has had a foreign object lodged in his brain since childhood, a crayon, left there from a childhood incident, pressing against neural tissue in the area responsible for higher reasoning, mechanically restricting his cognitive function in ways that add to whatever the baseline number already reflected. He sleeps at his workstation. He has consumed food during active meltdown warning alerts. He once caused a nuclear incident by inserting a donut into the reactor core to observe whether it would grow larger. He has been directly responsible, across the show's run, for an extraordinary number of the precise events his job title exists to prevent. That is the individual standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. That specific individual, at his workstation every day for more than 30 years. In Season 2, a three-eyed fish is pulled from a river located near the power plant. The show names him Blinky. He has a third eye positioned between and above the other two, and his existence constitutes unambiguous, visible evidence of environmental contamination within the logic of the show's own universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as campaign evidence that Burns is actively poisoning the surrounding waterway. The story receives national attention within the show. Burns is ultimately compelled to appear on live television and eat the fish to demonstrate its harmlessness. He eats it. The reporters watch, the town watches, and Springfield moves on. No follow-up environmental testing, no water quality study, no public health investigation. Nobody asks the obvious question that should follow naturally from the presence of a three-eyed fish in the local waterway. If the fish living in the river near this plant have developed a third eye due to radioactive contamination in the water they inhabit, what is that same contamination doing to the human beings who drink from the same water source every day of their lives? That question sits unanswered through every season that follows, waiting for someone in Springfield to ask it. The show provides its answer, but provides it sideways. In Season 8, in a context designed to invite the audience to process the information as comedy rather than as revelation. In the Springfield Files, Homer encounters what he believes to be an alien in the woods outside of town. Community panic escalates. FBI investigators arrive. The episode builds toward a dramatic reveal. The reveal is this: the creature Homer saw was Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive that the process causes his entire body to emit a visible green glow in the hours following each session. After each treatment, Burns wanders out of the facility in a dazed and euphoric state and moves through the forest in the dark, his body actually producing visible light. Homer sees this glowing figure moving through the trees, and his conclusion, and the entire community's conclusion when he reports it, is that what he saw must have been an extraterrestrial visitor, not the nuclear power plant that has been producing contamination for decades, not the industrial facility that has already produced three-eyed fish in the local river, an alien from outer space. That is the immediate, unexamined, explanatory leap that occurs. This is the depth of conditioning that has been established in this community around the subject of their nuclear neighbor. The possibility of radiation does not enter the cognitive field. An alien enters instead. The Simpsons movie removes all remaining ambiguity. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point of severity that causes the United States Environmental Protection Agency to determine that the town requires physical containment, not evacuation, not remediation. The federal government's conclusion is that Springfield is so comprehensively toxic that the only practical response is to seal the entire community beneath a glass dome and prevent the contamination from spreading to the surrounding country. The dome arrives. It comes down over the town. The residents who have been living inside the contaminated environment for decades are still inside when it closes. The dome is not a rescue. It is a quarantine. Springfield has been classified as an environmental hazard by the federal government of its own fictional universe, and its population is contained within the hazard zone. Now look at the residents. Homer Simpson has 4 fingers on each hand. His skull does not correspond to typical human cranial anatomy in any convincing way. His eyes protrude in a manner that would, in any actual clinical context, prompt immediate investigation. His overbite is pronounced beyond any functional range. His pain tolerance, demonstrated across hundreds of episodes of escalating physical calamity, has proven essentially unlimited. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen from cliffs and buildings, been struck by vehicles of various sizes, been caught in explosions, experienced physical traumas that by any reasonable medical standard should have ended his life many times over, and he has recovered from all of them. Not gradually, not with visible long-term consequence, but fully. His healing rate has no biological justification the show ever provides, and he has spent his entire working adult life inside a nuclear facility in daily proximity to an active reactor for more than 30 consecutive years. Marge has the same protruding eyes, the same 4-fingered hands, hair that maintains a structural tower without product or external support, defying gravity and basic physics across 36 seasons without variation or explanation. She was employed at the plant herself for a period of time. Both of their children were born in Springfield. to parents who had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years before any of the births occurred. Every child in the family displays the same physical characteristics: the spiky hair that holds its shape without product, the pronounced overbites, the eyes, the four-fingered hands, the yellow skin that covers every permanent resident of Springfield, every single one, and no one who arrives from outside. That final detail is where the theory becomes precise rather than impressionistic. When visitors arrive in Springfield, when guest characters come from other places, when people pass through the town from outside, they look different. Not subtly or in minor ways. Fundamentally different. Their proportions are more consistent with normal human anatomy. Their eyes are shaped in ways closer to actual human eyes. Their features suggest a biological baseline that the established Springfield residents do not share. The show draws its permanent population with the characteristics we've described and draws visiting characters from outside the town with more typically human configurations. The explanation that almost everyone applies to this observation is that it reflects the show's visual style, that the distinctive design of the core characters is simply what The Simpsons looks like, and that guest characters drawn more realistically represent a different aesthetic choice by the production team. This is accurate as a production observation. But within the internal logic of the world Springfield inhabits, what this creates is a visible, physical difference between people who live inside the contamination zone and people who come from outside it. People inside look like what decades of radioactive environmental exposure might produce in a biological population. People outside look like what human beings look like when they haven't been exposed to that environment. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same protruding eyes as every member of his household. His physical proportions deviate from normal canine anatomy in ways that parallel the deviations present in his owners. The family fish has 3 eyes. The wildlife in the vicinity of the plant is demonstrably, visibly altered by what flows from it. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a 3-eyed fish and says, clearly and without ambiguity within its own narrative logic, this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms. And then the show asks you to believe that the human beings living in the same environment, drinking the same water, breathing the same air, have been affected by none of it. Unless the show is not asking you to believe that. Unless the show has been telling you the opposite for 36 years, Burns knows. The canonical evidence for this is not inferential. Burns understands radioactive exposure at the biological level because radioactive exposure is what is sustaining his own continued survival. His weekly medical treatments involve radiation therapy administered on a precise schedule that cannot be interrupted without fatal consequences. He has funded private medical research. He employs personal physicians. He maintains pharmaceutical infrastructure dedicated to experimental compounds that manage the effects of what he is carrying in his body. He has spent over a century studying what radioactive material does to living tissue, because his survival depends on that understanding applied to his own biological situation. He knows what his plant is doing to the people of Springfield because he knows what radiation does. He has watched it work on his own biology for 100 years. He understands the difference between managed, medically supervised exposure with countermeasures and unmanaged, unmonitored exposure without any protection. He knows what the population downwind of his facility is receiving, and he knows they have access to none of what he uses to counteract it in himself. His continued employment of Homer Simpson as safety inspector is not a mistake or a byproduct of negligence. When German investors briefly took ownership of the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer and conduct a proper safety assessment. The compliance costs they discovered nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back immediately and rehired Homer on his first day of renewed ownership. A competent safety inspector would have the plant shut down within weeks. Homer's specific and thoroughly documented incompetence ensures the violations persist. The radiation keeps leaking, the water stays contaminated. Burns maintains his monopoly on Springfield's power supply and the economic dependence of its population. This is not accident, this is maintenance. The crayon is the detail that makes the theory complete. In Season 12, the crayon lodged in Homer's brain since childhood is removed. Homer's cognitive function rises dramatically. He becomes articulate, precise, capable of complex reasoning and sustained critical thought. He sees Springfield with a clarity his normal state prevents. He understands, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, the architecture of his situation, what his job actually is, what his employer is actually doing, what his town actually looks like when processed through an undamaged brain. It makes him miserable. He cannot bear what he sees. So he has the crayon put back. He chooses the fog. He chooses the specific, comfortable incapacity that allows him to continue without having to look at anything too closely. But the question the show never asks is the one that matters most. How did a crayon get lodged in a child's brain without a single physician, across an entire childhood and adolescence and adulthood of medical appointments in Springfield, ever identifying it? Every doctor Homer ever visited in this town looked past a foreign object in his skull and said nothing. Either the medical establishment of Springfield is catastrophically, universally incompetent at a level that itself requires explanation, or someone with influence over that establishment made a decision that the crayon should stay where it was. And if Burns's wealth and reach extend into the healthcare infrastructure of a town he essentially owns economically, if the physicians serving Springfield operate under the same structural incentive to look away from anything that is inconvenient to Burns's operation, then Homer's crayon is not a comedy premise lifted from physical impossibility. It is a specific image the show uses to describe something it cannot say directly. Something is wrong in the brains of Springfield's population. Something that keeps them unable to look at their situation. The three-eyed fish, the four-fingered children, the glowing man in the forest, the cracked cooling towers, and ask the most basic question that situation demands. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about the Simpsons. It explains all of them simultaneously. The aging paradox, explained by mutated cellular biology. The town's complete collective amnesia after catastrophic events, explained by neurological damage to the mechanisms responsible for critical assessment. Homer's extraordinary physical resilience, explained by biological adaptation to radiation, that has made his body nearly indestructible at the cost of nearly everything else. Burns's century-long survival, explained by the fact that the man most responsible for the contamination has also had the longest access to the most sophisticated tools for managing its effects on a living body. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the entire visual aesthetic of Springfield's permanent population. Springfield is a contamination zone that has forgotten it is a contamination zone. The residents are patients who have never been diagnosed, and the nuclear plant that dominates their skyline, that employs their neighbors and powers their homes and poisons their water supply and leaks invisible radiation into the air they breathe every day, is not background detail. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. The plant isn't part of the show. The plant is the show. Before we go any further, if you're watching this somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment. Tell me where you are and what time it is there. I always love seeing where these videos end up. If you want to keep going through Springfield with me, subscribe so you'll be here for the next one. Now, let's keep going. The deeper architecture of the contamination. Let's slow down and really sit with what Springfield looks like from above when you accept the radiation theory as the operating framework. Because it changes not just how you see the characters, it changes how you see the entire premise of the show. Consider the geography of harm. The plant is not located at the edge of town, inconveniently positioned but ultimately removable from the daily experience of the population. It is central. It is visible from most of the town. Its cooling towers appear in the background of scenes set across Springfield's neighborhoods with a regularity that, once you notice it, becomes impossible to unsee. The towers are not incidental scenery. The show keeps putting them in frame. The plant is always there, behind whatever else is happening, trailing its slow columns of emission into the sky above the community it is simultaneously powering and contaminating. The effect of this visual decision is cumulative. You see the towers behind the school, you see them behind the park, you see them behind the residential streets where the families live. The plant is never out of view for long. The contamination is never more than a background detail away. And the people of Springfield, going about their daily lives in front of those towers, have organized their existence around the fact of the plant, the way fish organize their existence around the fact of water, not because they examined the arrangement and concluded it was acceptable, but because it has always been there and nothing in their experience has prepared them to imagine it otherwise. The three-eyed fish in Season 2 is important precisely because it is the only moment in the show's early run where the outside world imposes its own judgment on Springfield's arrangement. The fish can't be ignored the way a safety violation can be ignored, because the fish is visible, tangible, biologically impossible by any normal standard. You cannot tell Blinky he is fine. Blinky has 3 eyes. The third eye is right there. But here is what the episode actually demonstrates about the Springfield population's relationship to evidence. Even confronted with Blinky, with a 3-eyed fish in a jar, with a biological specimen that concretely represents the answer to the question everyone should be asking, nobody asks the question. The show makes Burns eat the fish to demonstrate it's harmless. The show has Burns grimace at the taste before the camera cuts to his plate. The fish was not harmless. Burns knew it wasn't harmless. And Springfield accepted the demonstration anyway because Springfield had already decided, before the fish was caught, before the episode began, that it did not want to ask the question the fish was answering. The Springfield Files episode, which airs more than 5 seasons after Blinky, returns to this mechanism with a more elaborate version of the same demonstration. Homer sees a glowing figure in the woods, and the community's immediate response is to assume the explanation is extraterrestrial. Think about what that assumption requires. It requires that the townspeople have assessed the information and concluded that an alien visitor from another planet is a more plausible explanation for a glowing figure in the woods near Springfield than the nuclear plant that has been producing visible environmental effects in the town's waterways for years. It requires that the plant has been so thoroughly removed from the register of possible explanations that the word alien arrives before the word radiation even forms. That is not naivety. That is the result of a sustained and systematic removal of certain explanations from the cognitive vocabulary available to this population when it tries to account for what it observes. Burns achieved this, if the theory holds, not through any single act of information suppression, but through the accumulated effect of decades of his influence on the institutional architecture of Springfield. He owns the plant. The plant employs a significant proportion of the working population. The economic health of the town is bound to the plant's operation in ways that make challenging the plant feel like threatening the entire economic basis of one's own daily life. Burns has had relationships with Springfield's municipal politicians and civic institutions across a span long enough to establish the expectation that certain questions are simply not asked. He hasn't needed to suppress anything dramatically. He has simply needed to ensure, consistently and over a long enough time, that the community's relationship with the plant is defined by dependence rather than examination. And Homer is the instrument of this arrangement at the operational level. Homer, who cannot remember what he ate for breakfast, who once fell asleep at his workstation during an active meltdown warning, who threw a donut into the reactor core, with the curiosity of a person who has never been told why that might be a problem. Homer sits in the room between Springfield and catastrophe every working day, and his presence there is not the oversight that prevents bad things from happening. It is the oversight that ensures bad things can continue happening without being noticed or reported or corrected. When you understand Homer's employment as a structural requirement rather than an accident, the relationship between Burns and Homer takes on a different quality. Burns calls Homer by the wrong name, forgets his name entirely, treats him with contempt that Homer absorbs and returns to, offers him the bare minimum of acknowledgement that allows Homer to keep showing up. This dynamic has always read as comedy, the hapless employee and the imperious boss. But within the radiation theory, Burns's treatment of Homer serves a specific function. Homer cannot quit because Burns's contempt is calibrated to stay just inside the threshold of what Homer's emotional needs require him to accept. Homer needs the job, needs the stability, needs the recognition that even Burns's minimal and inconsistent attention provides, in ways that his particular combination of cognitive impairment and emotional damage produces. Burns keeps him dependent without giving him enough to be satisfied. The perfect maintenance of a tool you cannot afford to lose and cannot afford to value too highly. The crayon's meaning expands in this context. When Homer has it removed and his intelligence becomes available to him, the first thing that intelligence does is look at his situation clearly. The show depicts Homer, with the crayon removed, writing a detailed analysis of what is wrong with Springfield's environment. He understands what the plant is doing. He can see the problem with the specificity and clarity that the crayon prevented. He submits the analysis. He is ignored. He is ridiculed. The community he is trying to help by presenting it with accurate information about its situation responds the way Springfield always responds to information it would rather not have, by dismissing the source and returning to normal. And Homer, faced with the experience of being intelligent in Springfield, concludes that the intelligence is not worth the cost of bearing it, and has the crayon put back. But the point is not that Homer's intelligence was insufficient to the problem. The point is that intelligence, expressed visibly in Springfield, is insufficient to the problem. Lisa has been demonstrating this for 36 years from the position of the second smartest child in her immediate household. The community does not want the information. It has organized itself through decades of Burns's influence and its own accumulated preference for stability over accuracy to resist the information. The crayon being put back is Homer accepting the terms of the loop rather than fighting them. And the loop does not require his acceptance or his rejection. The loop will continue either way. The plant will continue either way. The water will continue at whatever level of contamination it has reached. The crayon, in or out of Homer's brain, changes nothing about any of that. This is the final statement of the radiation theory, and it is the most unsettling one. The contamination is not maintained by any single decision that could be reversed. It is maintained by an entire architecture of economic dependence, institutional relationship, cognitive damage, behavioral conditioning, community preference, and deliberate strategic positioning that Burns has been building and refining for over a century. You cannot solve it by removing a crayon. You cannot solve it by pulling one thread. The system is self-sustaining. Every component of it reinforces every other component. And the people who might challenge it are the people who have been inside the system long enough for the system to have become the premise of their daily experience rather than a choice they are aware of making. Springfield isn't polluted. Springfield is a pollution delivery system that is also a community. And the community is the most effective possible protection for the pollution, because the community cannot threaten the system that is harming it without threatening the system that sustains it. Section 2. Homer's Coma, the Dream That Might Be Everything. April 1st, 1993. The date is specific, and its specificity matters more than it might initially appear. On that date, the 18th episode of The Simpsons' 4th season aired on Fox. The title was So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show, and as the title acknowledges with characteristic self-awareness, it was a clip show, the kind of episode that long-running television series use to fill an installment with footage from previous episodes while managing production costs. The framing premise was straightforward. Bart has been playing April Fool's Day pranks on Homer, escalating each one further than the last, until the escalation reaches what Bart presumably considered its natural conclusion. He takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker, a machine designed to agitate paint cans with a violence that no container intended for human hands is built to survive. Homer opens the can later. The resulting explosion sends him to the hospital. He is lying in his hospital bed, recovering, when he notices a vending machine on the other side of the room. He wants a candy bar. He reaches for the machine, leaning too far, or the machine is unsteady, or both. The show is casual about the mechanics, which is itself interesting in retrospect. The machine tips forward. It falls. It comes down on Homer Simpson. Homer flatlines. He enters a coma, a genuine, narratively established, clinically described coma, lasting 7 weeks within the episode's stated timeline. Not a dream sequence framed as temporary from the start. Not a comedy cutaway. Homer is unconscious and will remain so for 7 weeks. The episode provides what appears to be a resolution. Bart appears at Homer's bedside, tearful, confessing his responsibility for the chain of events. Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. The scene is played for the comedy that has always been the mode for Homer's physical responses to Bart's provocations, and the episode ends. The show carries forward from this point as if nothing of lasting consequence occurred, except for a single detail delivered in the episode's final moments and then apparently forgotten by the show's forward momentum. Homer is informed by his doctors, in clear, unambiguous medical language, that he sustained permanent neurological damage during the 7 weeks he was unconscious. 5% of his brain function is gone, not compromised temporarily, not gradually recovering with time. Gone. Destroyed. The doctors say it clearly, without softening the information or leaving its severity ambiguous. Homer's response to learning that he is permanently brain damaged is to laugh. He laughs, and then he adds with a specificity that rewards closer attention than the episode invites you to give it, that he doesn't understand why he's laughing. The family finds this charming. The laughter and the comment about not understanding it are presented as further evidence of Homer's fundamental lovability. The episode ends. 32 more years of television follow, building on the premise that Homer woke up. Unless Homer never woke up at all. The Homer coma theory is the most comprehensively supported, most persistently debated, and most emotionally resonant fan interpretation in the entire history of The Simpsons. Its core proposition is simple enough to state in a sentence: Homer did not recover from his coma in April of 1993. Every episode that has aired since that date, every storyline, every guest appearance, every impossible adventure, every physical miracle, every celebrity encounter, every country visited, every job held, every time the family somehow ends up intact by the credits, is a dream being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, losing neurological function slowly across the decades while his family sits beside him and waits for something to happen. The evidence does not rest on a single scene or a single piece of dialogue. It rests on the shape of the show itself, on patterns that run beneath the surface of hundreds of episodes and become more legible the more seriously you look. Begin with the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, before the middle of season 4, The Simpsons was built on the texture of recognizable domestic experience. Not realistic in any strict documentary sense. It was always a cartoon and always a satire, but grounded in situations with genuine emotional and situational parallels to actual family life. Homer attempting to quit drinking, and the specific combination of wanting to be better and not quite being capable of being that which anyone who has tried to change a long-established habit will recognize immediately. Marge considering whether there is something for her outside the domestic role she has accepted, and the particular guilt and confusion that consideration produces in a person who genuinely loves her family and genuinely wonders what else might have been possible. Lisa's attachment to a substitute teacher who actually engages with her intelligence, and the grief of losing that when the substitute moves on and is replaced by the indifference that is the norm. Bart struggling academically, facing the concrete possibility of being held back a year, experiencing the particular anxiety of a child who knows he is capable of more than he is producing and is not sure why the gap exists. Financial stress, marital tension, parent and child in conflict over things that matter. These are stories with emotional counterparts in actual human experience, rendered through satire but connected to feelings that real families actually have. After the coma, the show transforms into something fundamentally different. The shift is not subtle or incremental. Homer goes to space. He discovers his mother is a fugitive radical who has been living underground since 1969. He joins a secret society with complex initiation rituals. He meets God more than once. He befriends a parade of celebrities in settings that grow more implausible each season. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs, some within a single season. He survives physical events, falling off mountains, absorbing full vehicle impacts, being shot, falling into reactor cores that exceed what any human being with any combination of resilience and luck should be able to survive. He becomes, progressively and without a clear ceiling, a character to whom essentially anything can happen and from whom any consequence can be removed by the next episode. The internet has been analyzing this shift for roughly 20 years under various framings. The question of when The Simpsons stopped being what it originally was has become its own genre of cultural discourse, and while viewers disagree about exactly where the meaningful line falls, the existence of a before and an after is not seriously disputed. The coma theory provides a precise answer. The Simpsons did not get bad. Homer's brain got worse. The progressive surrealism of the later seasons, the escalating disconnection from physical reality, the widening scope of the impossible events the show allows itself. This is not a product of creative decline or writer fatigue. It is the natural progression of a dream generated by a deteriorating brain. The architecture that kept the early dream close to remembered reality is eroding. The constraints that prevented the simulation from straying too far from the reference material are loosening. The mind generating this world is losing the structure it needs to hold the simulation close to what it was modeling, and the world expands into spaces that structure used to prevent. The piece of canonical evidence that haunts this theory most precisely is a matter of timing. 6 months before the coma episode aired, in the Season 4 premiere, a premiere that aired in September of 1992, precisely 6 calendar months before the coma would occur, Homer has a face-to-face conversation with God. Literal, direct, no framing that reduces it to dream or metaphor within the episode's logic. During that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. He says that Homer will one day learn the meaning of life. But not yet. The time has not arrived. God says Homer's moment is coming. 6 months later, Homer enters a coma. Within the theory's framework, this conversation is not a theological comedy moment from the early golden period, the kind of surreal premise the show occasionally permitted itself even before things changed. It is a prophecy with a precise fulfillment date attached. God was telling Homer that his waking life was approaching its end, that the version of himself that experienced the ordinary day-to-day texture of a working-class family in Springfield was running out of time. 6 months later, the vending machine fell, and Homer's conscious experience of the world ceased. What followed, what has been following ever since, is the dream that his damaged, unconscious brain began generating to fill the void. The aging paradox is where the theory does its most elegant work. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge look exactly as they did in the first season. The floating timeline convention is the industry term for this, used by many long-running animated productions, and it is usually accepted by viewers as a standard feature of the format rather than a phenomenon requiring explanation. But The Simpsons has run long enough that the paradox has grown into something more visible and more structurally significant than most productions ever have to confront, and the various explanations that exist for it. It's just a cartoon. It's just how the format works. The writers decided not to age the characters are accurate as descriptions of production choice without being satisfying as explanations of what the choice means within the show's own internal logic. The coma theory does not struggle with this at all. Nobody ages because Homer cannot imagine them aging. His unconscious brain is generating this world from the reference material it had available when consciousness ceased the world as it existed on the specific day in April 1993 when the vending machine fell. That reference material includes Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and Maggie just 1 and Marge exactly as she was on that morning. Those are the only versions of his family the dreaming mind has direct experiential access to. Those are the only versions it can generate with any fidelity. To dream your child at 15, you need to have experienced your child at 15 to have the memories of the intervening years available as raw material for the dream. Homer doesn't have those memories. He went under before those years happened. His children will remain the ages they were when he last held them, for as long as the dream runs, because the dream has nowhere else to put them. Marge stays the same because the last time Homer saw her clearly, she looked exactly like that. His friends don't change because his memory of them is fixed at the moment the machine fell. The dream preserves the world in the configuration it occupied at the last moment of consciousness, and it will maintain that configuration through every episode, every season, every impossible adventure, cycling endlessly through variations of a world that it cannot allow to change because the mind generating it is working from a single snapshot rather than from ongoing experience. The flood of celebrity appearances in the later seasons has a specific explanation here. Homer's unconscious mind is not completely sealed from external reality. Comatose patients receive ambient input, the television in the hospital room, conversations among family members and medical staff, audio from hallways, fragments of the outside world drifting through the sensory threshold that the coma has lowered without entirely eliminating. The dreaming mind absorbs these fragments and incorporates them into the simulation in whatever form makes available sense. A voice heard through the haze of unconsciousness becomes a character who appears in the Quickie Mart. A name mentioned by a visitor at Homer's bedside becomes someone Homer meets at a party in Springfield. The celebrities who pour through the later seasons are, in this reading, signals Homer is receiving from outside the dream, processed by a brain that cannot contextualize them properly, and so simply places them inside the world it's already maintaining. The show itself engaged with this theory in a way that reveals how seriously the people who make the show have taken it. In season 34, an episode was accompanied by what circulated as a leaked, deleted scene. In the scene, Homer wakes from a long coma, and everything since the 4th season is revealed to have been a dream. The scene was produced with the show's normal quality standards, circulated as though it were genuine additional content, and prompted significant audience engagement before the producers clarified that it was a deliberate hoax, a fake scene created and planted specifically to see what would happen. The fact that they committed the production resources to creating it, the specificity with which the scene engaged the theory's logic, And the choice to engage this specific theory rather than any other fan interpretation that exists for the show all reflect that the coma theory has been taken seriously in the production. They understood it well enough to fake its conclusion convincingly. Their denial came wrapped in content that explicitly depicted the conclusion being denied. Al Jean, executive producer, addressed the theory in 2015 and stated that it was not true. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not account for the aging freeze. He did not address the God conversation and its timing. He said it was not true, and the interview moved on. The fans did not move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation of the show's accumulated structural choices has ever accomplished. It makes the whole show make simultaneous sense from a single point of origin without requiring exceptions or special cases. If the theory is correct, the emotional character of The Simpsons changes from the inside out. The show that has made more people laugh than almost any other piece of American television is, at its foundational level, something else entirely. Not a dramatic tragedy in the formal classical sense, something quieter and more private. The account of a man who went to sleep and could not find his way back, and whose injured unconscious mind built him the only heaven he would know how to ask for, and then kept it running for as long as the power held. He wanted his family. That is the complete and sufficient statement of Homer Simpson's deepest wish. Not success or wealth or recognition or adventure. Marge still loving him. Bart still his mischievous, impossible, occasionally heartbreaking son. Lisa still playing her saxophone in whatever room she's retreated to. Maggie still small enough to rest in the crook of one arm on the couch while the television makes its noise in the corner. Friday evening in the house on Evergreen Terrace. The ordinary warmth and weight and chaos and noise of a home full of his specific family. The dream gives him all of it. It gives it to him over and over. Every episode, every season. The same family in the same house, endlessly cycling through variations of the life he went under trying to hold on to. The dream does not progress because progression would require Homer to have material for later stages of his family's life, and he doesn't. The children don't grow because Homer cannot imagine them grown, and what Homer cannot imagine, the dream cannot produce. And the dream does not end. This is the part that stays with you. The dreaming brain does not write endings for itself. Homer's unconscious mind is running a simulation of the only thing he cares about, and it will keep running it for as long as it has enough function to keep the lights on, because ending the simulation means something the theory does not specify and does not need to. You already know what it means. Ending the simulation means waking up, and waking up means finding out how much time has passed and how old his children actually are, and whether Marge is still there, and whether anyone is still sitting by the bed. Or it means not waking up. And that is the ending Homer's dreaming mind will not write for as long as it can prevent it. Every impossible survival, every reset that restores Springfield to baseline between episodes, every time the credits roll and everything is fine, again, this is not lazy writing. This is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end, because the story ending is the one thing Homer's dream is built to prevent. The coma theory does not diminish The Simpsons. It transforms it. Every joke becomes part of a world that a father built from whatever he had available, in whatever condition his mind was in at the time, as an act of preserving the only thing that mattered to him. Every adventure is the dream expanding the world because the dreamer needs more room than his last clear day provided. Every couch gag is Homer finding his way home to the family that is the entire point of the dream. The show will never confirm this. But it will not disprove it either, because the evidence is not in any single episode or scene. It is in the structure of 36 years, and the structure does not lie. Homer is still dreaming, the loop is still running. And in a hospital somewhere in Springfield, a Springfield that does not appear on any map, on a street that coordinates cannot locate, a man who just wanted his family keeps the only version of them he has left alive for one more week. The quality of the dream. There is a way of sitting with the coma theory that is more specific than the surface version of it usually gets. The surface version, Homer is dreaming everything since season 4, tends to be presented as a binary. Either the theory is true or it isn't. Either Homer is in a coma or the show is just a show. But the more interesting question is not whether the theory is factually true within the show's internal logic. It's what the theory reveals about the emotional logic of the show, regardless of whether it's literally correct. The coma theory is the most emotionally coherent reading of why The Simpsons is structured the way it is. Every structural feature of the show, the aging freeze, the tonal shift, the reset button between episodes, the progressive disconnection from anything resembling realistic consequence. The way Homer keeps surviving everything is explained more elegantly by the coma theory than by any other single framework. This is not usually how things work. Usually, a fan theory explains one strange feature of a show and creates other complications elsewhere. The coma theory explains everything in one move, without complications, without exceptions, without special cases. That level of coherence is rare enough to be worth taking seriously as something more than coincidence. The tonal shift bears extended examination because it is the most visible evidence. The early seasons of The Simpsons were praised, at the time of their airing, for a specific quality that critics found unusual in animated television: genuine emotional intelligence. The show was funny, yes, but it was funny in a way that felt true to something. The jokes arrived in the context of situations that resonated. Homer trying to stop drinking resonated not because the comedy was particularly sophisticated, but because the emotional landscape it occupied was familiar. The gap between wanting to be better and being unable to be better is something most people have inhabited at some point. The show located that gap with precision and lived inside it. That precision was what made the early seasons memorable in a way that transcended their jokes. The later seasons are also funny, frequently very funny, but they are funny in a different key. The precision is gone. The emotional landscape has been replaced by something more abstract, a world where anything can happen because the world has no fixed physical or emotional rules, where Homer's situation in one episode has no bearing on his situation in the next, where the comedy derives from escalation and surprise rather than from recognition. Watching the early seasons feels like recognizing something true about the experience of being a person in the particular kind of life Homer leads. Watching the later seasons feels like watching a very good cartoon where things keep happening. The coma theory says these are the same experience. The early seasons are Homer's brain generating a dream from the precise reference material it has, the recent memory of his life, his family, his daily experience, rendered with the fidelity that comes from proximity. The later seasons are the same brain generating a dream with older reference material, with eroding architecture, with the natural accumulation of neurological damage that comes from being in a coma for years. The fidelity decreases as the damage increases. The emotional precision of the early seasons is the precision of a brain that just went under and is still working from sharp, recent memory. The surrealism of the later seasons is the same brain working from material that has degraded. If the theory is correct, this means that the show's celebrated golden era, the seasons that critics and fans consistently identify as the best work the show has produced, the seasons that made it a cultural institution rather than just a popular cartoon, was the most accurate depiction of Homer's dream. The closest approximation to the life he had before the coma, and the later seasons, which fans have spent decades trying to diagnose as evidence of creative decline, are accurate depictions of a brain that has been in a coma for years, doing its best with less and less to work with. The early seasons are Homer remembering. The later seasons are Homer forgetting. And the comedy is there in both, because the dreaming brain is still trying, still generating, still running the simulation just with less precision available to it. And the reason every episode ends with everything fine, the reason the reset button always gets pressed, the reason Homer always makes it home, is that the brain running this simulation cannot afford to let the story reach a conclusion it cannot come back from. Every ending that restores the status quo is the dreaming brain pressing restart. Every impossible survival is the dream protecting its own dreamer. Every week that Springfield returns to normal is one more week that Homer's unconscious mind has managed to keep the thing he loves most intact. The coma as metaphor may be more important than the coma as literal fact. Whether or not Homer literally went into a coma in April of 1993 and has been dreaming since, the coma theory captures something real about what this show is and why it matters. The Simpsons is a love letter. It is a love letter written by the show's creators to the idea of the American family, expressed through a particular family with particular flaws and particular virtues, generated week after week for 36 years with the accumulation of detail and the depth of care that you only find in creative works that their makers have been genuinely invested in across a very long time. Whether Homer is dreaming or not, every episode is an act of love. A team of writers and animators and voice actors and producers building, week after week, the world inside the house on Evergreen Terrace, sustaining it across decades, keeping the kids exactly young enough to hold, keeping Marge's hair exactly as high as it has always been, keeping Homer exactly Homer enough to find his way home by the credits. The loop doesn't have to be a coma to be a love letter, but the love letter is there either way. Homer Simpson, portrait of a man designed to not notice. Let's spend some real time with Homer, because the character who sits at the center of everything we've discussed tonight is also the character whose situation is most thoroughly constructed to prevent him from seeing what his situation actually is. Homer Simpson has an unusual relationship with awareness. He is not uniformly or simply unintelligent. He has moments of genuine perception observations about the world or about the people around him that land with unexpected accuracy, insights that arrive sideways when his attention is not organized around producing them. He loves his family with a depth and consistency that is not in question across any version of the show in any season. His capacity for joy is essentially unlimited. His resilience, whatever its biological source, is extraordinary. These are not the attributes of a blank character. Homer is a specific and complete person, whose specific completeness happens to include a cognitive impairment so significant that it has effectively sealed him inside a version of his own experience that he cannot examine. The crayon is the literal version of this, but the crayon is only the most vivid and specific instance of a broader pattern. Homer has been, across his life in Springfield, systematically prevented from thinking clearly about his situation by a combination of factors that compound each other in ways that make the total effect greater than any single cause would produce. There is the radiation, which the theory suggests has done something to the cognitive architecture of everyone in Springfield who has been exposed to it for long enough, but which has done something especially significant to Homer specifically, because Homer has spent his entire adult working life in direct daily proximity to an active nuclear reactor. The average Springfield resident receives environmental exposure at whatever level the plant's emissions and waste disposal produce in the surrounding community. Homer receives that, plus decades of workplace exposure at a level that occupational safety regulations are supposed to prevent, but that Homer's own presence at the plant ensures cannot be enforced. He is the safety inspector. He is the person who would enforce the regulations. He is also the person most comprehensively exposed to the conditions the regulations are supposed to prevent. There is the crayon, pressing against the tissue responsible for higher reasoning, mechanically limiting the cognitive function that would allow Homer to connect the dots he is surrounded by. The show's Season 12 experiment with removing the crayon demonstrates what Homer is capable of when this mechanical limitation is absent. He is articulate. He is capable of complex analysis. He is able to see his situation with a clarity that the crayon prevents. Without the crayon, Homer understands the architecture of his own life in a way that makes him miserable because the architecture is designed to make understanding it painful. With the crayon, Homer is protected from that understanding by the limitation that prevents him from reaching it. There is the childhood loss, which the Mona theory traces through its specific mechanism and its specific perpetrator, but which has the most diffuse and pervasive effects of anything on this list. Losing his mother at 6 years old, without explanation, without warning, without any of the scaffolding that supports a child through understood grief, having her simply gone one morning, and being told she had died, and having the lie sustained across his entire childhood without any of the processing that losing a parent might have produced with the truth, shaped Homer into an adult whose most fundamental emotional responses are organized around preventing a recurrence of that loss. He will endure almost anything to keep what he has. He will tolerate treatment from Burns that no person with a stable sense of their own worth would accept, because Burns's contempt, however painful, is predictable, and predictable is safer than the unpredictability of whatever comes after you challenge the structure that keeps your life stable. There is the culture of Springfield itself, which has been shaped across decades of Burns's influence into a community where questioning certain things produces social costs that most people are not willing to pay. Where the implicit message sustained through institutional relationship and economic dependency and the accumulated weight of years of this being how things are, is that some questions are simply not asked. Where Homer's failure to look directly at the plant and what the plant is doing is not individual cognitive failure but participation in a community-wide norm that Burns has spent a century making normal. All of these factors compound each other. The radiation reduces the cognitive capacity for critical examination. The crayon mechanically limits the same capacity. The childhood loss organizes all of Homer's emotional resources around preservation of what he has rather than examination of whether what he has is good for him. The community's culture normalizes the non-examination at the social level so that even if Homer were individually capable of the examination, the social environment would present it as aberrant rather than appropriate. The result is a person who is genuinely kind, genuinely loving, genuinely funny, and genuinely incapable of seeing the central fact of his own life, that everything about his situation has been arranged by the man who employs him, working from an arrangement established decades ago with Homer's father, to produce exactly the person Burns needs at Sector 7G, compliant, dependent, unable to sustain effective resistance. Grateful for whatever minimal acknowledgement the structure provides. Present at his workstation every day, ensuring through his incompetence that the violations continue and the system runs and the water stays contaminated, and the people of Springfield remain in the cognitive state that the contamination produces. Homer is not a victim in the simple sense. He is too complete and too fully realized as a character for victimhood to be his only register. He is a person whose specific combination of attributes love, resilience, humor, the extraordinary capacity for joy that is the most unambiguous gift in his character exists alongside and despite the damage that has been done to him, not because the damage is small but because the person is large enough to contain both. He loves his family with a fullness that the damage does not diminish. He experiences the world with a sensory richness and an emotional availability that the cognitive impairment does not eliminate. He is both a casualty of a specific and deliberate system and a fully alive person who finds genuine meaning in the fragments of his situation that the system has left intact. The show has always known both of these things simultaneously, and holding them simultaneously is what makes Homer Simpson one of the most complex comic creations in American television history, rather than simply a funny cartoon character. He is the person who got broken and kept going anyway, not because he understood why he was broken or who broke him or what the breaking cost him, but because keeping going is what he does, and the family is still there, and the home is still standing, and there is enough left to make the effort worth it. Homer doesn't know his own story. He never has. He walks through it every day, sustaining it, embodying it, keeping the loop running by being the person the loop requires, without any clear sense of what the loop is or why it works the way it does. And the show watches this happen, season after season, with the combination of comedy and sadness that is the show's most specific and most irreplaceable quality. Lisa Simpson, the one who knows. If Homer is the character designed not to see, Lisa is the character designed to see everything. Lisa is 8 years old, and she has the clearest view of her situation of anyone in Springfield. She understands the nuclear plant and what it means for the community. She understands the environmental damage and the political structures that sustain it. She understands what Springfield is doing to its population, and she has the vocabulary to describe it with precision. She is surrounded by evidence of the things she understands, and she cannot stop seeing it, and she cannot stop being the person who points at it. And Springfield consistently, persistently, structurally fails to hear her. This is not the failure of any individual character's deafness. The show does not present Lisa's invisibility as the consequence of the specific people around her being specifically unable to hear her. It presents it as the consequence of the system. The system is not arranged to receive and process and act on the kind of information Lisa produces. The system is arranged to receive and process and reward the kind of information and the kind of person that the system already knows how to work with. Lisa is not that person. She never has been. The specific tragedy of Lisa's situation is that her intelligence, which is genuine and extraordinary, and the thing that makes her most fully herself, does not give her any leverage on the situation. Knowledge without leverage is torment in slow motion. She knows more than almost anyone in Springfield about what Springfield is. She can see the three-eyed fish and understand what it means. She can read the EPA report and understand its implications. She can see Burns's operation clearly and describe its effects accurately. And none of this changes anything. The knowledge does not produce action. The accuracy does not produce correction. The understanding does not produce transformation. Springfield absorbs Lisa's observations and continues exactly as it was, unchanged. This is the thing the show has been honest about since Lisa's earliest episodes. Intelligence in an environment that is not organized to use intelligence produces isolation and impotence rather than change. Lisa has been demonstrating this for 36 years. She will be demonstrating it in the next episode, and the episode after that, But there is a version of Lisa's situation that is harder to see and more interesting to sit with. In the version of Lisa as frustrated genius whose intelligence is wasted on her environment, she is primarily a figure of pathos. Brilliant, unable to be heard, sustaining herself on her own resources because her environment provides nothing to sustain her. But Lisa is also, in a way that the show returns to periodically, a person who has made choices. Not the choice to be intelligent in Springfield, that was not available to her, but the choice to keep insisting, the choice to keep raising her hand and writing her essays and submitting her observations and making the case for things that Springfield does not want to acknowledge. She could choose silence. She has seen what Maggie does with silence, and Maggie accomplishes things with her silence that Lisa does not accomplish with her voice. But Lisa does not choose silence. Lisa keeps speaking, keeps arguing, keeps trying, even when the evidence of 36 seasons is that the trying does not produce the changes she is trying for. There is a version of this that is stubborn, and a version that is admirable, and a version that is the expression of a value system that Lisa has committed to regardless of its cost. She is not insisting because she thinks it will work. She is insisting because she thinks it is right. The distinction is important. Lisa is not naive about her situation. She knows perfectly well that Springfield does not want to hear what she is saying. She says it anyway because the alternative, choosing silence, choosing the strategic invisibility that Maggie has turned into a weapon, choosing to participate in the collective agreement not to look, is a choice Lisa has decided she will not make. Whether this makes her stronger or sadder than Maggie depends on how you weigh it. Maggie has agency and effectiveness. Lisa has integrity and voice. These are not the same thing, and they do not produce the same outcomes. But they are both responses to the same situation, the experience of being intelligent in Springfield, and they are both legitimate responses in their own way. The show holds both of them without resolving the question of which is right. Maggie's silence and Lisa's speech are presented as simultaneous, equally valid, equally incomplete responses to a situation that has no fully adequate response. Springfield will not be fixed by Lisa speaking, and it will not be fixed by Maggie waiting. Springfield will not be fixed at all, because fixing it would require dismantling the architecture that sustains it, and the architecture is what the people inside it depend on for their survival. But Lisa speaks and Maggie waits, and the show watches both of them with the same gentle, clear-eyed, slightly devastating attention it has given everything else in Springfield for 36 years. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The summer of 1995 was the summer. The Simpsons attempted something no American animated television show had ever tried, and that most live-action shows approach with significant caution, even with the advantage of a fully capable cast. It constructed a genuine mystery, not a mystery played for immediate comedy resolution within the same episode, not a puzzle whose answer the audience already holds before the characters figure it out. A real, meticulously plotted, multi-episode whodunit with a substantial roster of credible suspects, deliberately embedded clues, carefully calculated red herrings, an explicit summer-long cliffhanger designed to have an entire national audience spend 3 months working through available evidence, and a formal promise from the show's creators that the answer was present in what viewers had already seen. Fox committed to the event with marketing resources that exceeded anything the show had previously received for a single storyline. America's Most Wanted, a program dedicated to covering actual unsolved crimes, produced a tie-in segment treating the fictional shooting of a fictional character as an authentic unsolved case requiring public assistance. Newspapers covered it. Radio programs discussed it. The show promised that a viewer who submitted the correct answer to the sponsored contest would be animated into a future episode. For the summer of 1995, Who Shot Mr. Burns was a genuine and broadly distributed cultural event organized around an animated mystery. Let's establish what made Burns a shooting victim that summer, because the motive list matters to the theory. Burns spent the weeks before the episode's climax accumulating enemies with a comprehensiveness that bordered on systematic. He stole oil from beneath Springfield Elementary School, which eliminated the school's funding for everything beyond basic operations, arts programs, music programs, sports, anything supplementary to the minimum. He drove Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy, destroying the livelihood of one of the show's core recurring characters and the gathering place for several others. He created a geological sinkhole that collapsed the Springfield retirement castle, displacing dozens of elderly residents, including Grandpa Simpson, and eliminating the foundation of their daily security. He had Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, injured during his construction operations. And for what the episode establishes as his culminating act of disregard for the community around him, Burns built a massive mechanical sunblocker and used it to eliminate natural light from the entire town of Springfield. Not figuratively, he blocked out the sun, literally, so that every resident of the community would be compelled to purchase all of their electricity from his power plant, removing their ability to rely on sunlight for any purpose. He stole the sun from a town. This is the action that immediately precedes the shooting. By the end of the episode's first part, the show had established clear and documented motive for nearly every significant character in its universe. Homer, because Burns had spent years failing to remember his name despite Homer working for him every working day of his adult life, a failure the show had played for comedy across the series, but which, in the context of this episode, reads as something more specific to a man who needs to be acknowledged by the powerful figure at the center of his professional life. Bart and Lisa, because the school's funding was gone, and with it the oil well that had briefly seemed like it might solve financial problems. Grandpa, because his home was rubble, and his stability with it. Groundskeeper Willie, whose job was eliminated. Tito Puente, whose music program Burns had cut. Moe, whose bar was destroyed. Smithers himself, recently fired after objecting to the sunblocker plan on ethical grounds, now unemployed and in a visible spiral. The town converged on a public meeting. The atmosphere in the meeting was not civic in character. Multiple characters were shown carrying weapons. Confrontation escalated to a specific pitch. Burns collapsed a single gunshot wound. He staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on specific letters. From the audience's viewing angle, those letters read as W and S. From Burns's own perspective, looking at the face of the dial, they would read as M and S. The screen went black. America was invited to spend the summer solving it. Part 2 aired in September. The investigation ran as a comedic procedural, with the Springfield police executing it at their characteristic level of effectiveness. Smithers confessed almost immediately, but the confession fell apart when it emerged that Smithers had been in a blackout state during the relevant time window and had actually shot old Jasper, in the wooden leg, in a completely different location, not Burns. Wrong victim. Wrong place. Wrong crime. Smithers eliminated. The procedural continued, eliminating suspects one by one with varying degrees of comedic alibi. Skinner had documentation, Moe had witnesses, and Tito Puente's alibi was a full composed samba he had written and performed to channel his fury into music, which remains one of the most elaborate documented alibis in the history of the mystery format. Evidence emerged from Burns's suit, a single eyelash. DNA analysis in the episode's universe identified the eyelash as belonging to a member of the Simpson family. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. Homer's motive was documented across seasons of established canon. Homer was arrested and appeared to be heading toward conviction until Burns regained consciousness and identified his attacker. It was Maggie. Baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account as rendered in the hospital room, he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot following the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. His gun fell from his holster during the struggle. Maggie picked it up. It discharged. Chief Wiggum summarized the legal situation. No jury in the world would convict a baby. The case was closed. Now let's examine why the case was never actually solved. Start with the contest and what it revealed. From the randomly selected sample of entries that Fox and the producers reviewed after the reveal aired, not a single viewer had correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. The grand prize being animated into a future episode of the show required a correct answer. Since none of the sampled entries had one, the prize was awarded randomly, and the recipient received a cash payment instead because the animation prize required an answer that wasn't present. The producers noted on the DVD commentary that they were aware of one person who had posted the correct guess online on the night the first part aired, using a college internet account. By the time the contest ended and producers attempted to contact this person, the account had been deactivated. They issued an open invitation in the DVD release itself for this person to come forward and claim their prize. As far as the public record reflects, they never did. Consider what this means as a data point. The show designed a mystery. It promoted that mystery as solvable from the available evidence. It ran a national contest around this claim. And when the answer was revealed, the randomly sampled pool of submissions produced essentially nobody who had correctly identified the answer from the clues as presented. Either the evidence was insufficient, or the answer didn't follow from the evidence the way the promotion suggested it should, or the audience was working from a fundamentally different set of assumptions about what the clues were pointing toward. Now examine the clues themselves. The sundial. Burns's hands land on letters that can be read as M and S, which the show's resolution interprets as standing for Maggie Simpson. The show presents this as its central visual clue, the piece of physical evidence that points most directly toward the answer. But Burns himself, in the resolution episode, states explicitly that his hands landing on those letters was not intentional. He did not position himself to communicate his attacker's initials. He fell, and his hands went where they went. The victim disavowed the central piece of evidence in the same episode that used it to close the case. The clue the entire mystery was organized around was described by the person it supposedly came from as accidental: the gun's position. In the episode's timeline, Burns's holster is shown to be empty before the shooting occurs. The gun was not on Burns's person at the moment of the attack. Whoever fired the shot used Burns's own weapon, a weapon that had already been removed from him before the confrontation took place. This means the shooter either took it from Burns beforehand or found it after it had been dislodged from him. This is not the profile of a premeditated attack by someone who arrived at the town meeting with a plan and a weapon. It is the profile of an opportunistic act by someone who encountered the gun by chance in circumstances that were not anticipated. A baby finding a gun on the ground in a parking lot and handling it fits this profile. But so do roughly a dozen other characters who were present and who hadn't arrived at the town meeting armed, who might have encountered Burns and his gun in the chaotic aftermath of the meeting's breakdown. Burns's recognized response. Before being shot, Burns produces a verbal reaction to his attacker consistent with recognizing someone familiar. His words are along the lines of, "It's you," not, "Who are you?" not, "What are you doing?" The calm, slightly weary recognition of someone whose presence is not surprising, even if its context is. Burns is a man who has famously, across dozens of episodes, been unable to remember the name of his own employee of decades. The proposition that Burns would look at a 1-year-old infant he has had no established relationship with and respond with familiar, unsurprised recognition strains the characterization in ways the show otherwise takes seriously. Homer's Season 18 confession. In a casual conversation, in an episode airing 13 seasons after the shooting's official resolution, Homer states that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says it plainly, on camera. Other characters are present. Nothing happens. No investigation is reopened. No reference is made to the official verdict. No one reacts with the response that a confession to attempted murder of the town's most powerful man should produce. The show treats Homer's statement as a throwaway comment. Either Homer is constructing a claim for the kind of attention-seeking social purpose that is entirely consistent with his character across the series, or the official verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because Homer is the reason it was wrong. The theory with the strongest structural coherence among the alternatives involves Marge. Marge had watched Burns systematically dismantle the institution where her children were educated, injure her family's dog, destroy her father-in-law's home, and eliminate sunlight from the town where she was raising her family. She had material motive. She had witnessed the direct impacts of Burns's decisions on her specific household at a level of personal damage that few other characters can match. And Burns had previously developed a significant romantic infatuation with Marge during a prior episode in which she worked at the plant, an infatuation the show established with enough detail to make it a functioning character trait. For Burns, not a single episode gag. If Burns woke from his coma and recognized Marge across the room as his attacker, choosing not to identify her would be consistent with everything the show established about his attachment to her. He would take a bullet in the most literal available sense, rather than put her through a prosecution. He would let the investigation reach whatever conclusion it reached, look at whatever the environment offered him as an alternative answer, and quietly protect the woman he was infatuated with by pointing elsewhere. Maggie is the cleanest available elsewhere. Chief Wiggum says it himself clearly on camera. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Blaming Maggie closes the case, protects whoever actually fired the shot, costs Maggie nothing in any practical legal sense, and produces a conclusion that everyone finds emotionally satisfying in a specific way. The baby did it. It was an accident. Nobody is really guilty. Everybody can go home. The perfect resolution for a community that has a documented preference for comfortable conclusions over accurate ones. The episode's final image: Maggie, alone in the room after everyone has left. She looks around carefully and deliberately, checking the space, confirming she is unobserved. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that replicates pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confession, as the evidence that seals the verdict, the baby's own wordless acknowledgement that she did what was said she did. But a 1-year-old child who was present in a parking lot when a gun discharged and a man fell will reenact what she saw, because that is how young children process experiences, through physical repetition of the witnessed event. The motion could be memory. It could be reenactment of something Maggie watched someone else do. The check of the room before performing the gesture is the part that makes this reading interesting. That level of situational awareness, ensuring privacy before acting, is itself evidence for the theory that Maggie's cognitive capabilities exceed what her developmental stage should produce. Whatever she's doing in that moment, she knows not to do it in front of witnesses. An alternate Smithers ending was fully produced for the mystery, not sketched or partially rendered, fully animated, fully voiced, complete. It was a functioning alternate conclusion. It was later shown in a clip show episode hosted by Troy McClure, where it was dismissed on the grounds that accepting it would require ignoring DNA evidence pointing to a Simpson family member, which would be the host's specific word, nutty. He then made reference to the real-world O.J. Simpson trial of the same period, in which a jury had in fact ignored significant DNA evidence to reach a different verdict. The show was explicitly, directly acknowledging that official verdicts and factual accuracy are not synonymous, that evidence can be ignored or interpreted in whatever direction someone with influence over the process wants it to go, and that the word nutty applied to ignoring DNA evidence did not prevent the ignoring of DNA evidence in a highly public and recent real-world case. The show embedded a direct argument against the reliability of its own official answer inside the content it used to present that answer. The mystery was solved with a wink. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show stated this clearly. The writers stand behind it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. But the clue that was used to justify the answer was disclaimed by its own supposed source. The DNA pointed to a family rather than an individual. An alternate ending was produced. Homer confessed on camera without consequence. The final image of Maggie is legible as memory rather than guilt. And in a town where a judge once issued a legal decree making it a crime to speak an inconvenient truth, a case being officially closed does not constitute evidence that it was solved. The case is closed. The shooter is officially Maggie. Springfield has moved on. And the gun that started the whole thing has been where it belongs ever since, somewhere in the background, behind the official answer, in the category of questions that the town has voted to stop asking. What the contest tells us about the mystery. There is a wrinkle in the contest story that deserves its own attention, separate from the question of who actually shot Mr. Burns. The wrinkle is about the design of the mystery itself, and what the contest's failure tells us about how the mystery was constructed. The show promised that the answer was deducible from the available evidence in the first part of the episode. This was the terms of the contest, and it was stated clearly enough that viewers spent the summer genuinely trying to work backward from clues to conclusion. The mystery was promoted as solvable. The clues were described as sufficient, and when the answer arrived, essentially nobody had reached it. There are two ways to interpret this outcome. One is that the mystery was genuinely solvable, but that the clues were better hidden than the promotion suggested, and that the audience simply wasn't thorough enough in its analysis. The other is that the answer was chosen after the first episode aired, or at least after the clue structure was finalized, and the clues were then adjusted backward to point toward the chosen answer rather than the answer, having been selected because the clues pointed toward it. The show's own writers have confirmed that multiple shooters were considered and that the answer changed across different drafts of the script. Barney Gumble was seriously considered, with plans to send him to prison. Smithers was considered seriously enough that a full alternate conclusion was produced. The fluid nature of the answer during the writing process is incompatible with the claim that the first episode contained clues specifically designed to point toward the answer. The clues were laid before the answer was finalized. The arrow was drawn after the target was placed, rather than the arrow being followed to the target. This matters because it means the mystery was never actually solvable in the way it was promoted. The contest was a cultural event that the show built around a premise, you can figure this out, that the production process contradicts. The viewers who spent the summer working through the evidence were not working toward a conclusion that the evidence was designed to reach. They were working toward a conclusion that was selected from available options after the evidence structure was already in place. And the conclusion that was ultimately selected, Maggie, was the most convenient available conclusion for a specific and identifiable reason that has nothing to do with which character's guilt follows from the most evidence. Maggie cannot be prosecuted. Chief Wiggum says this explicitly. The investigation ends without legal consequence. The case closes without anyone going to prison or facing any formal accountability. The shooting of the richest man in town by an individual from the poorest resource demographic possible is filed and forgotten. Springfield gets the closure it prefers, a conclusion that doesn't require it to do anything. This is Springfield's preferred resolution shape. An answer that requires no action, an explanation that closes the case without opening any others, a conclusion that everyone can accept because everyone can move on from it. Maggie is not just convenient because she cannot be prosecuted. Maggie is convenient because her identification as the shooter eliminates the need to examine anyone else, and examining anyone else, Homer, Marge, Smithers, any of the dozens of characters with genuine motive and more plausible access would require Springfield to look at itself in ways it has always preferred not to look. The mystery was designed to be solved in a specific way. The solution was designed to require no consequences. And the community accepted both the solution and its convenience without examination, because that is what this community does with solutions that arrive in the right shape, in the right wrapping, from the right direction. The mystery is closed. Springfield moved on. And the gun is wherever it is, in whatever evidence locker the Springfield Police Department maintains for cases involving infants, waiting for nobody to come looking for it. Section 4. How Mr. Burns has survived for more than a century. Charles Montgomery Burns was born in the late 19th century. The show is not precise about the exact year, and this appears intentional, a way of leaving the full extent of his age permanently undefined while accumulating enough canonical detail that the number is clearly extraordinary. He has personal memories of events from before the turn of the 20th century, describing them not as history absorbed through education but as experience from his own life. He refers to figures from the early 1900s in the past tense of personal acquaintance rather than the past tense of historical reference. He served in the Second World War in a role the show characterizes as morally ambiguous at minimum, and took the opportunity during that service to steal a $1 trillion bill from the United States government, then kept it hidden for decades. He knew Howard Hughes during the period when Hughes was a functioning industrial figure. He has referenced the Gilded Age, the remarkable concentration of industrial wealth in the last decades of the 19th century, as lived personal experience rather than as a period he studied. Working only from the canonical references the show treats most consistently, conservative estimates of Burns's age place him past 100 years old. Reading the accumulated chronological detail less conservatively pushes that number significantly higher, potentially approaching 140, depending on which episodes you weight most heavily and how you resolve the contradictions between them. The show is inconsistent about this, which is part of what keeps the question alive. And Burns does not simply exist at this age. He functions. He runs a corporation worth many billions. He manipulates municipal politics and local government with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing it for generations. He executes schemes that require sustained strategic intelligence, long-term planning, and an accurate working understanding of modern finance, technology, and law. His body is evidently frail. The show has made a running element of the ease with which his physical form can be overwhelmed by relatively minor forces, a small bird being sufficient to tip him over on multiple occasions, but his mind is not frail. Burns is arguably the most strategically capable character in Springfield, operating with a combination of ruthlessness and patience and long-term perspective that nobody else in the town can match or effectively resist, and he has been maintaining this operational capacity at that level for somewhere between 1 and 140 years, more than any human being should be able to sustain conscious strategic function. The Springfield Files episode is the one that explains the mechanism most directly. and it does so while framing the explanation as a peripheral reveal in an episode ostensibly about something else entirely. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment. The treatment is so intensive and so chemically and radiologically aggressive that it causes his entire body to emit visible green light in the hours following each session. The glow is real, not metaphorical. It is visible in darkness. It can be observed from a distance, and it produces the appearance of something other than human in the hours before it fades. After each treatment, Burns leaves the facility in a dazed and altered state, moving through the woods outside of town in the dark, his body producing its own illumination. The show tells you explicitly, miss one treatment appointment and Burns dies. Not deteriorates, not becomes seriously ill, dies within the week. The margin for error in his survival protocol is 0. His continued existence is not a passive biological fact that he maintains by existing. It is an active, sustained, precisely scheduled intervention that cannot be interrupted without terminal consequence. His life is maintained the way you maintain a machine through regular, skilled, time-sensitive servicing. Miss the service window, and the machine stops. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who built his empire on nuclear power, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled, calibrated radioactive input to sustain his own biological functions. His body has been so thoroughly altered by over a century of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through the cellular processes that ordinary human biology relies on. It requires external radiation the way a normal human body requires food and water. The input must arrive on schedule. Interrupt the schedule and the system that depends on the input collapses within days. This creates a specific and haunting symmetry. The contamination that Burns's plant has introduced into Springfield's environment has altered the biology of the town's population in ways they cannot access treatment for, in ways most of them don't know to look for, in ways that express across the full spectrum of physical and neurological effects the series has depicted. And at the center of this system, sustaining it and maintained by it in equal measure, is the man responsible for it, keeping himself alive through weekly doses of the same material that is quietly, systematically, irreversibly doing something to everyone else. The disease diagnosis is where the show makes Burns's biological situation most specific. His doctor delivers the information in what is probably the most quoted single scene in Burns's medical history. Burns has every disease known to medical science, all of them. Simultaneously, every pathogen and disorder and degenerative condition that human medicine has identified is present in Burns's body at the same time. The doctor explains that these diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one blocking all the others from gaining dominance. Everything that should kill Burns is being prevented from doing so by everything else that should also kill Burns. The gridlock is total. No single condition can progress to a terminal stage because the progress of every condition is counteracted by every other condition also trying to progress. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. Comparing it to 3 people trying to fit through a doorway simultaneously, none of them can get through because all of them are trying at once. The show plays this for comedy. It is legitimately funny. It is also, within the radiation theory framework, a clinically coherent explanation for what a century of specific medical management of radioactive exposure and its consequences actually looks like when you work out the biology. The weekly radiation treatments are not curing anything. They are maintaining the equilibrium. They are calibrating the precise balance of forces that keeps every disease locked in stasis, counteracted by every other disease, prevented from progressing to dominance. Remove the treatments and the balance breaks. Whatever the treatments are doing to sustain the equilibrium ceases. Every disease that has been held in suspension surges forward. The body is overwhelmed not by a single failing system, but by every failing system simultaneously. The result is not gradual decline, it is catastrophic total failure. Everything at once, the entire accumulated biological debt coming due simultaneously in a single event. Burns's body is a reactor. The weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods. Pull them out, and the reactor goes critical. Smithers is something more specific than a devoted assistant. He manages Burns's schedule. He ensures Burns makes every treatment appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with an attentiveness. The show sometimes plays in one register, and that functions, at the operational level, in another entirely. The show has established repeatedly, across multiple episodes, that if Smithers were removed from his position, Burns would be helpless within a specific time frame. Not emotionally or practically helpless in the sense of not knowing where things are kept or not having someone to manage his calendar. Physically helpless. Without Smithers managing the treatment protocol, Burns misses an appointment. The equilibrium breaks. Everything that has been held at bay arrives simultaneously. Smithers knows this. Whatever the full emotional texture of what he feels for Burns and the show has established a great deal about this over decades. With a depth of feeling that the series has treated seriously, his devotion is also sustained by the clear-eyed knowledge that his absence is a death sentence. He is not replaceable by a competent substitute who could learn the schedule. The relationship between Smithers and Burns's survival is personal, specific, and built on decades of accumulated knowledge of exactly how this particular body's maintenance works. Without that knowledge applied by someone who holds it, the system fails. Smithers isn't devoted to Burns. Smithers keeps Burns alive, and he knows it, and that knowledge is the subterranean foundation of everything else that exists between them. Burns's historical scope provides a dimension that the weekly treatment mechanism alone doesn't fully account for. The Burns family, as the show establishes it, is not a recently wealthy dynasty. The family's wealth and institutional presence predate the Industrial Revolution, predate the United States as a coherent national entity, predate most of the institutions that currently constitute American civic life. Burns has maintained personal, direct control of that dynastic inheritance for over a century by being personally present to maintain it, not through the normal generational transfer that requires trusting successors to preserve what the previous generation built. He has outlasted successors. He has outlasted competitors. He has outlasted regulatory frameworks that were designed to constrain him and political figures who tried to challenge him. He has outlasted everything and everyone because he has been there continuously while everything and everyone else changed around him. What did the Burns family do before weekly radiation treatments were a medical option? Before nuclear medicine existed, before any of the specific technology that currently sustains Burns's survival was available, how did previous generations of this family maintain the dynasty's continuous operational coherence across what the show establishes as centuries? The show never answers this. But it establishes the continuity with enough specificity that the question is not trivial. Centuries of continuous family control over accumulated assets requires either extraordinary fortune, in the ordinary sense, consistent luck across generations, or something that isn't luck. What that something was in the periods before nuclear medicine is a question the show raises through implication and declines to pursue. Burns has nearly died multiple times within the show's canon. He has been shot, he has collapsed, he has been hospitalized dozens of times, some involving conditions that should have been terminal. He has been physically exposed to hazards that would end ordinary people without meaningful delay. And every time he comes back, not through the passive cartoon resilience that carries Homer through things that should kill him. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the deliberate, expensive, highly organized machinery of accumulated wealth applied systematically to the problem of his mortality. Every medical contract, every pharmaceutical compound, every research initiative, every institutional relationship he has cultivated and maintained over a century, all of it serves one operational purpose. Keep the treatment coming. Keep the equilibrium sustained. Keep the reactor running. Keep Burns alive. The scariest dimension of Burns's immortality is not Burns himself, it is Springfield. The town's economy depends on the plant. The plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on treatments that depend on infrastructure that depends on the wealth that the plant generates. It is a closed loop, self-sustaining, impossible to exit from any point in the cycle without breaking the system that the population inside the loop depends on for their basic daily survival. Springfield cannot afford to hold Burns accountable for anything the plant has done to the town, because holding Burns accountable would require threatening the plant, and threatening the plant would collapse the economic structure that most of the town's working population depends on to function. Burns designed this dependency. Over a century of deliberate positioning, he made himself necessary. And once you have made yourself necessary to the people you are harming, you are protected from the consequences of the harm by the very people who are experiencing it. They cannot afford to make you stop. Their survival requires that you continue, and what you do while continuing is their problem to absorb, not yours to answer for. Burns is not immortal. He is the result of a century of deliberate engineering applied to the obstacle of mortality by a man with unlimited resources, a sophisticated understanding of the biology involved, and the institutional capacity to maintain whatever interventions the engineering requires. He has not defeated death. He has simply made dying extremely expensive and extremely inconvenient, and surrounded himself with everything required to keep the cost too high for death to collect. He is too expensive to die. Springfield will keep paying the bill, and the bill is everything. The empire Burns built. Return to Burns for a moment longer, because there is a dimension of his situation that the weekly treatment mechanism alone doesn't fully capture. Burns is not maintaining a position he inherited. He is sustaining a system he built. That distinction matters. An inherited position gives you the resources and relationships that previous generations developed, and your job is to manage them and not destroy them. Burns has done something more specific and more deliberate. He has spent over a century actively constructing an architecture of dependency that ensures no challenge to his position can be sustained without doing more damage to the challenger than to Burns himself. Every Springfield resident who works at the plant is in this architecture. Every business in Springfield that depends on the plant's workforce having money to spend is in this architecture. Every municipal service that depends on tax revenue generated by the plant's operations is in this architecture. Every political figure whose career depends on Burns's willingness not to oppose them is in this architecture. The architecture extends outward from the plant in concentric circles, touching every institution and relationship in the community, making Burns's continued operation the necessary condition for the continued operation of everything else. This is not something that happened by accident. Burns built it deliberately across a century with the specific goal of making himself irreplaceable, not loved, not admired, not even feared in the way that produces the kind of resistance that fear can generate when fear accumulates past a threshold. Irreplaceable, necessary. The load-bearing column that everything else is resting on, which means you cannot remove the column without bringing down everything it supports. The genius of it, and it is a kind of genius, even if it is the genius of a thoroughly malevolent intelligence applied to thoroughly self-serving ends, is that it made the community complicit in its own exploitation. Springfield doesn't just tolerate Burns's operation. Springfield defends it, not because Springfield loves Burns or trusts him or has examined the arrangement and concluded it's fair. Because Springfield has internalized the fact that the arrangement's continuation is the condition of its own survival, and the distinction between tolerating something and defending something collapses when the cost of the alternative is your own destruction. Burns built a town that cannot hold him accountable, because accountability would cost the town more than continued exploitation. That is the achievement. A century of deliberate construction, maintained through everything that has been thrown at it through the shooting, through the German investors, through the EPA dome, through every challenge the show has dramatized, and the architecture holds. Burns survives all of it, not through resilience or luck, through design. The system he built is more durable than the challenges to it because he spent a century making it so. The weight of Ned Flanders' silence. There is a quality to Ned's suffering that is different from the quality of suffering the show depicts in its other major characters, and it is worth naming specifically because the difference is where the show's deepest statement about Springfield lives. Homer's suffering is largely invisible to Homer. His emotional damage is real and its effects are pervasive, but Homer moves through it the way a person moves through water. They have always lived in, not as an environment they are aware of, but as the medium of their existence. He does not experience his situation as suffering in any sustained way. He experiences it as normal, as the texture of his life, as things that happen to Homer and that Homer recovers from and that Homer does not particularly examine. This is, within the coma theory, because Homer's dreaming mind is not going to generate sustained suffering for itself. It is going to generate the version of Homer's experience that Homer can live with, which is the version where the suffering doesn't register as suffering. Lisa's suffering is conscious and articulate, and consistently expressed. She knows exactly what is wrong with her situation. She can describe it in detail. She has been describing it with precision for 36 years. Her intelligence, which is her most essential characteristic, is also her most reliable source of clear and accurate suffering, because intelligent enough to see your situation clearly in an environment that is hostile to intelligence is a specific and sustained kind of painful. Ned's suffering is different from both. It is conscious in the sense that some of it is visible. He is aware of what he has lost, aware of the weight of what the universe has not given him in return for what he has offered it, but it is not fully expressible, because the capacity for the full expression of that suffering, the anger, the grief, the sustained confrontation with the injustice of his situation was removed from him in childhood. Ned carries everything but can release almost nothing. The pressure builds without a consistent outlet. The conditioning holds it. And what you get, across 36 seasons of this pressure accumulating under the management of that conditioning, is a person who presents as serene and who is, underneath the presentation, in a state of sustained interior crisis that the show only briefly allows to the surface. The moment in the hurricane episode when the conditioning fails is so striking, partly because of the contrast with everything that surrounds it, but partly because of what the failure reveals about what has been held in. The depth of what comes out when the lid comes off is evidence of how much pressure was being held. Ned has been managing a very large amount of something for a very long time. The conditioning was doing a great deal of work to keep it managed. And when it failed, just briefly, just enough for the speech to escape, that was the show letting you see what has always been underneath the niceness. The niceness is real, in the sense that it is consistently expressed, and that its expression is not purely performance. But the niceness is also the only form available to Ned for engagement with his world, and that limitation is the thing that makes his situation genuinely tragic rather than simply difficult. Homer can rage. Homer can fall down and get back up. Homer can fail spectacularly and laugh at his own failure. Homer has access to the full range of responses to his situation, even if the specific responses he tends to produce are often the wrong ones. Ned has access to one response. It is a good response. It is a response that the world should reward more than it does. And in Springfield, it is the response that the world is designed to accept endlessly without reciprocating. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The universe of Springfield has made its priorities clear, and the priorities are not virtue and not effort and not sustained good faith over decades of genuine commitment. The priorities are something else, and whatever they are, Ned has never had them, and Homer has always had them. And the gap this produces between the two men's situations, maintained across 36 years of adjacent existence, is the Simpsons' most honest statement about the world it is describing. The Springfield of the mind. Let's return to where Springfield actually is, and approach it from a slightly different angle. The show's writers have said repeatedly that Springfield is meant to be every American town. This is true as a design intention, but it may also be true in a more specific and more interesting sense. Springfield may be the American town that exists in the American imagination rather than in American geography, the town that every American who grew up in a mid-sized community in the 20th century carries internally, assembled from the specific details of their actual hometown and from decades of American cultural production about what hometowns are supposed to contain and mean. Every American who grew up in a town with a plant of some kind, or a dominant employer, or one rich family whose presence shaped the community's economics and whose absence would threaten them. Every American who grew up with a church on the corner and a bar down the street, and a school that never quite had enough money, and a neighborhood gossip, and a weird kid nobody quite understood, and a family everyone could see having problems and pretending not to. Every American who grew up watching local politics be managed by relationships rather than by principle, who watched the gap between what the official version of events said and what actually happened widen in ways that adults seemed to accept and children found confusing. Every American who grew up in a place that was their whole world for a period and that they later tried to return to and found either unchanged in the wrong ways or changed in the wrong ways. Springfield is that town, not because the show has precisely mapped any actual place, but because the show has assembled, from the cultural debris of decades of American storytelling about small-town and mid-sized American life, the version of that life that sits in the American cultural imagination as the reference point for what that life means. The tire fire, and the nuclear plant, and the town hall, and the bar, and the school, and the gorge, and the monorail, and the rich man on the hill, and the safety inspector who falls asleep, and the neighbor who is too good for his own good. These are not inventions pulled from nothing. They are distillations. Every element is pulled from the repertoire of what American towns contain, compressed and heightened, and placed together in a configuration that produces maximum resonance with the broadest possible audience. You know Springfield because you grew up somewhere like Springfield. Even if Springfield looks nothing like where you actually grew up, you know it because the shape of it, the institutional layout, the social dynamics, The specific combination of dependence and resistance that a community organized around a dominant employer produces is a shape you have encountered before, in your own experience, or in the culture that described your experience back to you. The show found that shape and built its world in it, and then it has been returning to that world every week for 36 years, adding detail, deepening the texture, making it more specific and more resonant with each season, until it is now more completely realized than most actual places. Springfield exists everywhere in American memory because it is made of everywhere in American memory, and that is why you can always go back to it. Not just on television, in your mind, in the version of it you built, watching it across the years, the specific details accumulating into a place you know the way you know somewhere you lived. Section 5. Maggie Simpson and what she is waiting for. There is a 1-year-old child sitting in the background of The Simpsons, and she has been sitting there for 36 years. She holds a pacifier. Her eyes are very large and very attentive. She communicates through sounds and gestures and, occasionally, an extremely directed stare that other characters in the show consistently underestimate and consistently forget about. She cannot walk reliably without falling. She has not produced meaningful spoken language across hundreds of episodes of a show whose other principal characters produce language almost without pause. By every standard developmental metric applicable to 1-year-old children, she appears to be at the earliest possible phase of cognitive and physical development, the phase at which language has not yet formed, at which complex planning is not neurologically available, at which the kind of understanding of other people's inner lives that psychologists call theory of mind is essentially absent in typical children of this age. She has done the following things. She shot a billionaire. She organized a rebellion among the infants at a daycare facility against an authoritarian caretaker, coordinating other babies in collective resistance in ways that their developmental stage should categorically not allow. She has preserved members of her immediate family from multiple life-threatening situations through actions that required accurate assessment of the situation and timely choice of the correct intervention. She was subjected to standardized intelligence testing and found to possess cognitive capabilities that the testing instrument could not properly measure because the instrument was designed for a range that Maggie apparently exceeds in ways the test was not built to capture. She has demonstrated problem-solving capacity in unscripted, novel circumstances that would be remarkable performance from a competent adult, let alone from an infant who hasn't yet learned to walk without supervision. And she has said across all of this, essentially nothing. Not a word in 36 years. In the middle of a household where everyone else produces constant, overlapping, high-volume language every waking moment. Begin with the moment in the Burns hospital room because of what it reveals about the specific cognitive capacity it requires. The room has emptied. Everyone who was present has left. Maggie is alone. She performs a specific sequence of actions. She looks around the room, not the reflexive turning of an infant orienting to the environment, but a deliberate scan, checking specific points, the door, the corners, the windows, confirming that the space is clear and that she is not being observed. Having completed this check and confirmed her privacy, she moves her pacifier in a motion that replicates pulling a trigger. What that sequence requires: the understanding that other people have their own perceptual experiences and can observe things you do not want observed. The recognition that those perceptions can be managed by controlling what they have access to. The practical application of that recognition through a specific pre-action confirmation that the observers are absent. These cognitive capacities do not typically appear in 1-year-old children. Theory of mind in its basic form, the understanding that other people have their own inner states distinct from yours, does not reliably develop in human children until between ages 3 and 5. The kind of social, strategic awareness that involves checking to ensure you are not observed before performing an action you have assessed as one you don't want observed is more sophisticated still. Maggie did it automatically, practically, without any sign that the process of checking and confirming required significant effort or deliberate thought. The longest daycare is the most sustained, most detailed, most compressed demonstration of what Maggie is actually operating at. Released as a theatrical short in 2012, nominated for an Academy Award, and 7 minutes long from beginning to end, it is 7 minutes of Maggie executing a multi-stage, goal-directed plan in a novel environment with incomplete information, adapting to unexpected obstacles in real time, and succeeding at the objective. The setting is a daycare facility. The problem is a caterpillar she wants to protect from another child who wants to destroy it. The solution requires Maggie to read an unfamiliar environment, identify what resources are available and where, identify what obstacles exist and where they will move, predict the behavior of other children and of adult staff with enough accuracy to route around their interference, adapt her approach when early strategies fail due to factors she couldn't anticipate, execute physical actions that require timing and spatial coordination, and succeed at protecting the caterpillar and releasing the butterfly it becomes. All of this while being physically constrained to what a 1-year-old body can do. She falls down. She crawls when running would serve better. She cannot reach things at adult height. Her physical form is a constant obstacle to the execution of plans that her mind is producing at a level her body cannot match. And she compensates. Every time an obstacle appears that her current physical capability cannot overcome, she finds an alternative path. Every time a plan fails because her body won't cooperate with it, she generates a different approach. Her cognitive processing outpaces her motor development by a margin so extreme that watching her work is like watching someone who is extraordinary at chess, playing with one hand tied behind their back while the pieces are also slightly out of reach. The constraint is real and significant, and she wins anyway. The radiation theory provides a specific mechanism for this. If Springfield's environmental contamination produces biological mutations, and if those mutations are not uniform across individuals but expressed differently depending on biology, genetics, and the specific nature of the exposure, then Homer and Maggie represent the extreme ends of a distribution. Homer's mutation, produced by decades of daily proximate exposure to an active nuclear reactor, compounded by the physical presence of a foreign object in his brain, working on a baseline cognitive architecture that may already have been compromised by generational environmental exposure, pushed his cognitive function in one direction. Maggie's mutation, produced by the same environmental source working on a different biological substrate, pushed in the opposite direction. The same radioactive input, different biology, opposite result. Homer is what happens when the contamination diminishes something. Maggie is what happens when the contamination amplifies something. They are, in this reading, mirror images. The most cognitively diminished member of the immediate Simpson family, and the most cognitively amplified, produced by the same environmental cause working in opposite directions on different substrates. But the amplification is not by itself the most interesting thing about Maggie. The most interesting thing is what she has chosen to do with it. Look at Lisa Simpson's situation and what it has taught Maggie. Lisa is a genius. The show establishes this repeatedly, specifically, and without ambiguity. Her intelligence is not an exaggeration or a source of self-deception. It is validated by external measures and demonstrated through performance across dozens of episodes spanning the show's entire run. She is a better saxophonist than most adults who have played for years. She understands ethical, political, and scientific questions at a level that exceeds most of the adults around her. She reads adult-level material and engages with it substantively. She is measurably, demonstrably, consistently more intelligent than almost everyone in her immediate environment, and she knows it, and she acts on it by using her intelligence visibly and continuously as her primary mode of engaging with the world, as the tool through which she participates in her community and her family, as the thing she leads with in every situation. And Springfield responds to this with a combination of indifference and active resistance that the show has documented with painful consistency across every season. Lisa speaks up and is ignored. Lisa challenges something she has correctly identified as wrong and is dismissed. Lisa produces work of genuine quality and watches it be overlooked in favor of work of lesser quality that fits more comfortably into the frameworks the community already has. Lisa fights every single day for the recognition that her abilities and her effort should produce, and the community's response to this sustained effort is to consistently fail to provide it while occasionally punishing her for trying. She is isolated. She is lonely. She has more friends among visiting characters and temporary presences in the show than among the permanent residents of Springfield who have known her for years. Her intelligence is her most essential characteristic and has made her life substantially harder than it would be if she were less capable. Maggie has been watching this happen since she was born. She has observed, with whatever cognitive apparatus she is operating with, the complete pattern of Lisa's experience across her own entire existence. She has seen what happens when you are smart in Springfield and visible about it. She has watched the smartest member of her household fight continuously for something that Springfield will not give her, and pay a significant social price for the fight, and receive nothing in return for the payment. Maggie made a different decision. Lisa chose visibility. Lisa chose to use her intelligence in the open, to announce it, to fight with it, to make it the front she presents to the world. And the world responded to that front the way Springfield responds to most things that challenge its preference for staying the same. Maggie chose silence. Maggie chose the position that Springfield never monitors, never examines, never takes seriously as a threat or a factor, never bothers to investigate. She chose to be the baby, to present the behaviors the world expects from someone at her developmental stage, the falling, the pacifier, the wide observant eyes, the apparent passivity, and to use the invisibility that presentation provides as operational cover for everything she is actually doing. Think about what this means in practice. Every significant action Maggie has taken across the show's run has occurred in spaces where the adults around her were not paying close enough attention to notice. The Burns shooting happened in a parking lot during the chaos following a large public meeting. The daycare rebellion happened in a facility where adults had dismissed the infants as incapable of meaningful, coordinated action. Every rescue, every intervention, every demonstration of capacity, all of it in the margins, in the background, in the spaces where no one thought to look because no one was looking at the baby. She made them not look. She maintained the disguise deliberately. She performs exactly the level of capability that meets the expectation of people who have already decided she is a typical infant, and she saves everything else for when nobody is watching. 36 years of that. Watching, learning, storing, assessing, waiting. What she is waiting for is the one thing the show has never told us, and the show's silence on this specific question is the most carefully maintained mystery in its entire run. The Burns shooting was officially closed. Springfield's location was partially answered and then retreated from, but Maggie's endgame has never been approached in any concrete narrative way. The show has built a 36-year case that she is extraordinary. It has returned her to the background after each demonstration as though the demonstration didn't happen, and it has left the question of what she is building toward completely, deliberately, permanently open. There is something behind that pacifier that has been observing Springfield for 36 years, something that has watched every mistake Homer has made and noted it, something that has watched Burns's operation and understood it in ways that Homer never has, something that has watched Lisa fight and learn from the fight, what fighting costs and what it produces. Something that is still deciding. When Maggie decides the time has arrived, nobody in Springfield will be watching the right place. Nobody will be monitoring the baby. Nobody will have prepared for whatever a person with Maggie's capabilities and Maggie's patience and 36 years of silent, comprehensive observation decides to do when she finally, at the moment she has chosen, acts. That is exactly how she designed it. Section 6. The predictions: what The Simpsons actually gets right and how. In the year 2000, an episode of The Simpsons aired a brief glimpse of an imagined future America. In that future, Lisa has become President of the United States, a detail the show uses to make observations about the political and economic landscape she has inherited. The episode identifies her predecessor, the president whose catastrophic financial decisions she must now address, as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before the 2016 election. When screenshots from the episode circulated in the months surrounding that election, the cultural response was a particular kind of vertigo, the recognition of something you have already seen arriving in the world you are currently living in. The show had depicted this. You had watched it, and now here it was, not as satire but as news. The screenshots went viral in waves. The phrase "The Simpsons predicted it" became a cultural reference point with its own established meaning, immediately understood and widely shared. People who hadn't thought about The Simpsons in years were suddenly sharing clips from episodes that aired when they were children and asking, how did they know? This is the prediction that defined the phenomenon. But it is not the beginning and it is not the end. A 1,995 episode contained a wrist-mounted communication device that functions in its basic operational description and physical configuration like a modern smartwatch, a technology that would not become commercially available for another 2 decades. A 1,998 episode contained a mathematical equation that serious mathematical analysis determined appears to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, a value that physics would not confirm experimentally until 2012. A 1999 episode has Homer proposing a cosmological theory that the universe is shaped like a donut, a theory that cosmologists examining background radiation patterns would later find some evidence to support. A 1993 episode depicted a flu virus originating in Asia, causing mass panic in Springfield, complete with resource shortages, institutional failure to respond adequately, and a frantic and ultimately futile search for a reliable treatment, airing 27 years before the events of 2020. In that same fictional outbreak episode, the panicking population accidentally releases a swarm of killer bees and Asian giant hornets, which the media gave the name murder hornets, appeared in the United States during the early period of that actual 2020 event. A 1996 episode included a joke about a specific hip-hop group accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. That exact collaboration actually happened in 2024, 28 years after the joke. A 1998 episode depicted a media corporation acquiring Fox's entertainment assets. Disney completed that transaction in 2019. The phenomenon is real in the sense that these coincidences genuinely exist and genuinely accumulate. The list is longer than these examples. The specificity in some cases produces a genuine sensation, the feeling of encountering something familiar that should not be familiar yet, the sense of having been here before in a context that makes that impossible. The official explanation from inside the show is blunt and for the overwhelming majority of cases almost certainly sufficient. Al Jean, throw enough darts and some of them will hit bullseyes. Bill Oakley. The episodes are old enough that history simply repeats itself and some of it overlaps. The Simpsons has produced close to 800 episodes across 36 years. Each episode contains many satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and social behavior. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some percentage of it will align with future events through the operation of normal probability because future events emerge from the same cultural trajectories and technological directions that the show was observing and extrapolating when the original episodes were produced. The writers weren't seeing the future. They were looking carefully at the present and following its most visible directions forward. Fact-checking organizations have examined the most widely shared prediction claims and found mundane explanations for nearly all of them. Trump had been publicly discussing the possibility of running for office since the late 1980s. By the year 2000, writing him into a joke about celebrity politics taken to its most absurdly logical conclusion was not prophecy. It was satire based on available and visible information. The Disney-Fox prediction reflected media consolidation trends that had been accelerating throughout the 1990s. The satirical premise was already visible in the direction the industry was moving, and the show simply depicted where that direction was heading. The smartwatch was not a prediction of a specific technology, but an extrapolation of an existing trend toward miniaturization and personal computing that was already clearly in motion. The writers were not guessing. They were highly educated observers of cultural and technological change, following those changes to their logical, satirical destinations. Confirmation bias is doing significant and under-acknowledged work in the maintenance of the prediction phenomenon's cultural weight. The show has made thousands of satirical observations that did not come true. Jokes about technologies that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went differently. Jokes about cultural shifts that failed to arrive. Not one of these failures circulates. Not one of them gets screenshotted and shared with a caption about what The Simpsons got wrong this time. Confirmation bias operates in only one direction. It records hits and forgets misses. Filter 800 episodes through a mechanism that preserves only accurate observations and discards everything else. Display the filtered result to an audience primed to find the pattern meaningful, and you produce something that looks from the outside like prophecy through the operation of selection alone. For the large majority of the cases, the dart-throwing explanation is complete. It is sufficient. It is almost certainly correct, but some cases resist it. The Trump prediction did not generically observe that a celebrity might seek political office, which would have been the level of prediction that volume and trend extrapolation fully accounts for. It named Trump specifically, and the episode depicted him descending an escalator to announce his candidacy, a visual that mirrors with uncanny specificity the staging of the actual 2015 campaign launch in Trump Tower, where Trump descended an escalator to make his announcement. The species of animal that attacked in the Siegfried and Roy episode matches the actual 2003 event precisely. The event type matches. The specific animal involved matches. These details exceed what a general satirical observation about the risks of performing with large predators would naturally produce. The most interesting frame for the outlying cases is also the most counterintuitive. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future. Not through supernatural mechanism, not through access to information the writers should not have. Through the mechanism of cultural influence, which is the most powerful shaping force available to a piece of media with a large, sustained audience maintained over a long period of time. And The Simpsons has been operating as precisely that kind of cultural force in American life for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. When the show makes a joke about a Trump presidency in the year 2000, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. They carry it forward in memory. It becomes a reference point when Trump's name appears in news coverage in the years following. It becomes part of the cultural framework through which a Trump candidacy and eventually a Trump presidency is imagined and processed before it exists. It makes the idea feel less like a shocking impossibility and more like an inevitable punchline, something that hasn't happened yet but that fits a pattern that people already have access to. And when it does happen, the experience of encountering it is filtered through the familiarity that the joke created, not shock, recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The show does not predict the future. It normalizes futures that are already forming. It takes trajectories that are already in motion and depicts their destinations as accomplished fact, which makes those destinations feel legible and even inevitable when they arrive. The satire doesn't forecast the outcome. It makes the audience comfortable with the outcome before it occurs. And that familiarity, that sense of having already processed this possibility through the filter of comedy, changes how the actual event is received when it finally materializes. Springfield doesn't reflect America. America and Springfield have been in an extended conversation for 36 years, with influence moving in both directions, each shaping the other's cultural imagination in ways that are difficult to trace cleanly after this much time has passed. The nuclear power plant with its endemic safety failures and institutional negligence. The billionaire insulated from meaningful accountability by the size of his accumulated wealth. The community too overwhelmed by its own daily survival to organize effective resistance to the forces that are making things worse for everyone in it. The endless cycle of catastrophe, followed by institutional amnesia, followed by the same conditions producing the same catastrophe again. The community that votes, deliberately, to prefer comfortable lies over accurate accounts of its own situation. These were not predictions of where America was heading when the show began. They were, from the first episode, observations about where America already was, rendered in a format that 30 to 40 million people watched every week during the show's peak, and that has never entirely left the cultural conversation since. 36 years later, the observation and the thing observed have become difficult to separate cleanly. The show wrote down what it saw. The writing made what it saw feel more real, more settled, more inevitable. And what it wrote down keeps arriving, because it was never predicting anything. It was describing something that was already true and always would be. The show wrote enough possible futures that some of them had to arrive. And the ones that arrived are the only ones that anyone remembers now. The others never happened, and so the prediction log doesn't include them. And from inside that log, the show looks like it sees things it shouldn't be able to see. It doesn't. It just looks harder than almost anything else at what is already there. The thing we cannot let end. Go back to Lisa's wedding for a moment. Season 6. Lisa at 23, engaged, building a life. The episode does something unusual for the show. It lets you see how good the show could be if it allowed the characters to develop. The future it depicts is not wish fulfillment or fantasy. It is an honest, emotionally precise extrapolation of who Lisa is, pushed forward through time by the same forces that have been shaping her across the series. She is older. She has grown. She carries the specific combination of gifts and wounds and habits of mind that she has always had, and what those things produce in a 23-year-old navigating the adult world is exactly as complicated and exactly as interesting as you would expect. The episode is good. It is, by most assessments of the people who watch and analyze this show carefully, among the best work the show has produced. And it demonstrates something that the floating timeline's permanent return to status quo prevents us from seeing very often. That these characters, aged and allowed to develop and changed by the passage of time, are capable of sustaining exactly the kind of emotionally resonant storytelling that the show's golden era was celebrated for. The mechanism that produces great early Simpsons episodes is not locked to 1989. It travels across time with the characters, which makes the decision to return Lisa to 8 years old at the episode's end feel like a specific choice rather than a default. The flash forward proves the production could age these characters and make something beautiful with the aging. The return to the permanent present proves the production has decided not to do that. The choice is real. The alternative is demonstrated to be viable. And the decision is to close the window and return to the loop. Why? The honest answer is the one I've been building toward across this entire section, and it has two parts that are both true. The first part is commercial. The Simpsons as a franchise is built on characters in specific configurations. Bart at 10 is merchandise, is brand identity, is the recognizable cultural artifact. Bart at 17 or 25 or 35 is something new that has to build its own audience. The characters' frozen ages are, among other things, the frozen ages of a product whose commercial identity depends on specific, recognizable features that aging would alter irreversibly. This is real. It is part of the explanation. But the second part is the more interesting one. The Simpsons has been on television for longer than a significant portion of its current audience has been alive. For many people who watch it, there was never a time before The Simpsons was on television. It has always been part of the landscape of American cultural life, always present as a reference point, always running. And what that kind of persistent presence creates, over the course of decades, is something more specific than brand loyalty or entertainment habit. It creates a relationship, not with the characters as fictional entities, but with the specific configuration of the world they inhabit, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the opening credits, the particular collection of voices and faces and dynamics that the show has sustained for 36 years without fundamental alteration. That configuration is what we cannot let end. Not the show exactly, and not the characters exactly, but the specific version of the world they represent. The version where the kids are young enough to be in the house, where the parents are young enough to be in the middle of their lives, where Friday evening at The Simpsons is a thing that still happens and will keep happening. That version of the world is not just a fictional setting. It is a container for something that many members of the audience experienced as real. At some point in their lives, maybe when they were children watching the show for the first time, maybe when their own children were young and the comparison was easy, maybe just in the general way that the shape of the domestic life the show depicts resonates with what domestic life felt like at its best, from the inside. The floating timeline keeps that container intact. As long as the Simpsons stay at their frozen ages, the thing the container holds stays intact too. The specific domestic world that the show has been the container for. And aging the characters, allowing time to pass and the family to change, would puncture the container in ways that cannot be repaired. Lisa at 23 does not live in the house on Evergreen Terrace. Bart at 15 is not the same person who skateboards past the school in the opening credits. Homer and Marge with adult children are in a different chapter of their lives than the chapter that has always been the premise of the show. Let the characters age and the container breaks. The thing it holds has to find somewhere else to live or disperse. And the audience that has been keeping what it holds inside the container, the collective memory of Sunday evenings, and that couch, and those voices, and that world being reliably present, loses the place where it was keeping. We cannot let them age because we cannot afford to lose the container. And we will keep watching, and the show will keep running, and the timeline will keep floating. Because every week we watch is one more week the container holds, and one more week that the thing inside it is safe. The predictions and the audience. There's one more thing about the prediction phenomenon that doesn't get discussed enough. The predictions work as a cultural phenomenon not just because of confirmation bias and volume and trend extrapolation, but because of when we find them. The experience of discovering a Simpsons prediction is almost always the experience of looking backward. You see something happen in the world, and then someone shows you a clip from an episode that aired years or decades before it, and the clip matches the current event in a way that feels remarkable. But the direction of that experience matters. If you had watched the original episode when it aired and then watched the current event occur, the experience would be different. less uncanny. More like, oh, that's what the show was satirizing in the abstract has now arrived in concrete form. The satire is about something specific now rather than about something general. The episode feels less prescient and more current. The prediction experience requires the discovery structure. You have to find the old episode after the fact. You have to be shown the resemblance by someone who is presenting it as remarkable. The temporal sequence, see the episode first, see the event second, produces recognition. The retrospective sequence, experience the event, then be shown the episode, produces prophecy. Same two data points. Completely different emotional experience depending on the order you encounter them. The internet made the retrospective sequence the dominant mode of engaging with Simpsons predictions because the internet is organized around sharing discoveries, and discoveries are, by definition, things you found by looking backward. You cannot discover something you watched at the time it aired. You discover things by finding them later, after the referent they resemble has already arrived. So, the Simpsons prediction phenomenon is partly an artifact of the internet's retrospective discovery structure. The show is old enough and comprehensive enough that for almost any current event, there is probably an episode that anticipated something in the vicinity of it. The internet finds those episodes and shares them. The experience of finding them, organized by a structure that presents the episode after the event rather than before it, produces the uncanny sense of prophecy. And the cultural conversation about The Simpsons as a prophetic text is sustained and amplified by this structure, becoming more entrenched with each new discovery, building into a mythology about the show that the show itself neither planned nor controls. This is interesting on its own terms, but it's also the mechanism through which Springfield is most visibly doing the thing that the prediction section argues Springfield does. By being a consistent presence in the cultural imagination, by providing a set of images and scenarios and character dynamics that are widely shared and widely remembered, the show makes itself available as a reference point for an enormous range of real-world events. And when those real-world events arrive, the reference point is there, and the resemblance is noted, and the show's cultural presence deepens further. The prediction phenomenon makes The Simpsons more central to American cultural life with every new match, which makes the show better positioned to anticipate future events, which produces more prediction claims, which deepens the phenomenon further. The show predicts the future. The predictions make the show more culturally embedded. The cultural embedding makes the future more like the show. The future looks like what the show predicted. The show predicted the future. The loop runs forward and backward simultaneously. Springfield is in the middle of it. Springfield is always in the middle of it. Section 7. Mona Simpson. The conspiracy that broke 3 generations. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official family history. Abe Simpson had told his son that his mother passed away when Homer was young. He had shown Homer a grave. Homer had absorbed this the way Homer absorbs painful information, not through examination or prolonged grief, but through a slow internalization that let the loss settle into the foundational architecture of his personality without him needing to look at it directly. He grew up believing he was the kind of person whose mother had died, and this belief, unexamined and never openly discussed, became the subterranean structure beneath every visible aspect of his adult emotional life. The desperate hunger for approval that makes Homer tolerate treatment from the people around him that no person with a stable sense of his own worth would sustain. The attachment to Marge that sometimes tips past love into something closer to dependency, not love in the free sense. The love you offer because you choose it, but love in the sense of holding on to the one stable presence you cannot risk losing. The terror of abandonment that expresses itself in Homer's need to be liked, included, remembered, acknowledged, even by people whose opinion of him he has no rational reason to value. The compulsive need for recognition that makes Burns' persistent failure to remember his name something more painful and more specific than a running professional humiliation. Burns is failing every time to see the person who needs to be seen. For a man whose foundational wound is the belief that he was not worth staying for, that failure arrives on something older and more essential than professional dignity. Season 7's Mother Simpson rewrote all of this. Homer fakes his death to avoid working on a Saturday, which begins as comedy and ends somewhere else entirely. When Marge insists he correct the official record of his fictional death, Homer visits the Hall of Records and discovers that his mother is alive. The grave Abe showed him is real, but it belongs to Walt Whitman. Abe spent Homer's entire childhood passing off a famous poet's headstone as evidence of a death that never occurred. Homer finds Mona in a cemetery, visiting what she believes is the grave of the son she lost. The recognition scene, the moment when Homer proves who he is and she understands what she is looking at, is one of the most emotionally direct scenes the show has ever produced. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. Then, Mona explains why she left. Springfield. Mona Simpson was married to Abe and had a young son named Homer, and she was, on the surface, ordinary. A woman living within the domestic framework of her time while the world outside went through changes that were not ordinary at all. The civil rights movement, the protest culture, the political resistance to Vietnam. Something in the convergence of these things changed Mona. The show depicts this with characteristic blend of comedy and genuine emotional weight. She was radicalized. She joined a group of activists. She found a cause. The target was a laboratory in Springfield, a biological weapons laboratory, owned by Mr. Burns. Not just the nuclear power plant. Burns owned a separate facility designed to produce weaponized pathogens, biological weapons, manufactured and stored in the same community where Homer was growing up. Germ warfare materials. In Springfield, the same man who built a nuclear reactor with 342 safety violations was also operating a laboratory dedicated to producing substances capable of mass biological harm. In the town where his employees lived with their families, where children attended school, where people went about their daily lives with no knowledge of what the richest man in their community was doing down the road. Mona and her group broke in. They used an antibiotic compound to neutralize the biological agents stored in the facility. The operation succeeded. The weapons were destroyed, and as the group fled through the chaos, Mona stopped. Someone had fallen during the commotion. She turned back to help. The person on the ground was Mr. Burns. She helped him up. He looked at her. He saw her face. He identified her. And from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. Burns called the FBI. Mona's legal situation became a function of Burns's reach, his connections, his willingness to pursue this specific grievance with the resources available to a man of his wealth and institutional influence. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe or Homer. She could not explain to a child who would be waking up in a few hours that the reason she was not there was not because she had chosen to go, but because the man she had stopped to help off the floor of a laboratory she had just bombed had responded to her kindness by destroying her ability to go home. She kissed Homer goodnight while he was sleeping. She left. He woke up and she was gone. And Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 27 years of his life carrying a story about himself that was structured around a loss that had not occurred in the form he believed it had. When Mona returns to Springfield in the 7th season, Burns recognizes her, almost immediately spots her through a cab window with the attentiveness of someone who has not forgotten and has not stopped watching. The FBI appears at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer watches his mother leave for the second time. This time he is not 6 years old and sleeping when it happens. This time he is an adult who understands what he is watching, and he knows, now, who is responsible. And he knows specifically that the man responsible is the man who signs his paychecks every week. Homer does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not appear to access the anger that the situation should, by any reasonable measure, produce in a person who has just understood that their employer destroyed their family before they were old enough to understand what was being destroyed. The show plays this not as a comedy beat about Homer's limited cognition, but as something quieter and sadder than that, as the portrait of a man so thoroughly shaped by the specific damage done to him that he cannot reach the anger his situation demands. The damage was installed before Homer had the developmental capacity to resist it. Burns's pursuit of Mona when Homer was 6 years old created wounds that shaped Homer into the particular kind of adult that Burns's operation needs. Someone who cannot sustain resistance, who is grateful for whatever scraps of stability his situation provides, who will endure treatment that should not be endured because the alternative, being abandoned again, being alone again, losing the structure he has spent his adult life carefully constructing around himself, is worse than the treatment. Burns did not engineer this outcome. He intended to punish a woman who destroyed his weapons laboratory. What he produced, as a secondary consequence of the punishment he chose, was a man perfectly calibrated to serve his interests. Whether this outcome was calculated or accidental is one of the questions the show never answers, and the ambiguity is itself meaningful. The result served Burns's interests precisely enough that the distinction between deliberate and accidental collapses. A later episode reveals that the debt runs further. Burns had committed an unspecified crime. Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's permanent employment at the plant, regardless of performance, regardless of errors, regardless of incidents. 742 documented errors, and Homer was never permanently let go. The deal Abe made protected Homer in the way that deals with people like Burns protect people by creating a dependency that looks like security while ensuring the beneficiary remains inside the system that the other party controls. Homer's job was protected by an agreement between his father and his mother's persecutor, brokered in private, maintained in silence, never disclosed to the person it ostensibly benefited. 3 generations. Abe, who knew and bargained with the enemy rather than exposing him. Mona, who fought and paid for the fight with 27 years of exile from her child. Homer, who inherited the consequences of both and has never been able to trace the lineage of his own damage to its source, working every day inside the building built by the man who took his mother, powered by the material that has done whatever it has done to his brain. Mona died in a later episode. The show gave the moment its full weight. Homer at her side, his hand in hers. No joke to cut the tension, no comedic beat to manage the audience's discomfort with the seriousness of what is happening. A man and his mother and the 30 years of ordinary time that should have existed between them and did not, pressing down on the room as she leaves it for the last time. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes and the couch gags and the physical comedy and the satirical observations and the 36 seasons of Homer finding his way home, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's decision to punish a woman who briefly stopped to help him. A woman who chose compassion in the wrong moment for the wrong person and paid for it with everything. Burns won. He has always won. In Springfield, the man with the institutional power and the accumulated wealth and the century of practice at using both writes the rules, and the rules say that Homer Simpson will clock in at Sector 7G for the rest of his working life because his grandfather made a deal and his mother made a choice, and the richest man in town needed exactly the kind of broken man that the combination of those two things produced. Homer was broken before he ever arrived at that workstation. The breaking happened in 1969, in the dark, while he was asleep. Section 8. Where is Springfield, the town that cannot be found? Springfield is the most famous fictional city in the history of American television. More Americans can summon Springfield in their imagination, can picture the nuclear plant's cooling towers, the tire fire perpetually burning on the edge of town, the gorge, the harbor, the monorail route, the elementary school's crumbling facade, the Quickie Mart and its parking lot, the sundial in the town square that can locate on a map the capital cities of several actual states. It has been analyzed more thoroughly by fan scholars than most real American municipalities have been analyzed by academic geographers. Its institutions have been examined as models for understanding American civic dysfunction. It is, in every sense that matters culturally, more real to the people who grew up watching it than many places they have physically visited. And nobody knows where it is. The question has been asked in every conceivable format for the show's entire run. Geographic triangulation from clues embedded in specific episodes, area code analysis applied to numbers that appear on screen, state abbreviation investigation, climatic inference from weather patterns depicted across different seasons. The results of all of this accumulated analysis do not converge on an answer. They contradict, systematically and persistently, in ways that increase rather than decrease with the addition of new evidence. Springfield is simultaneously in the north and the south. It has coastline and it is landlocked. It borders multiple states that do not border each other. Its climate ranges across a span of conditions that no single American region produces. Its geography includes mountains, desert, farmland, forest, ocean access, and active volcanic features, a combination that has no real-world American parallel. Individual episodes have provided clues that seemed at the time to narrow the field significantly, and then subsequent episodes have produced clues that contradict the narrowing entirely. Lisa's area code corresponds to a Missouri exchange. A state abbreviation visible in one episode is NT, which is not a real American state abbreviation. When Homer calls the state capital in a relevant episode, The voice on the other end implies a state name beginning with a vowel. The show gives you information that looks like a real clue and then gives you other information that makes the previous clue untenable. Every time you think you have it, something closes the door you thought you had opened. Matt Groening addressed this directly in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, which is near where he grew up, and chose the name in part because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, appearing in more than half of all American states, which makes it available as a setting that viewers from nearly anywhere can feel some local claim on. For approximately 48 hours following the interview, the mystery appeared to be resolved. Springfield was in Oregon. There was a statement on the record from the show's creator. The show continued contradicting this. Episodes that aired after the interview placed Springfield in geographic contexts that Oregon cannot support. The show's writers did not adjust their practice to honor the creator's answer. The production maintained the ambiguity by continuing to produce contradictions, treating Groening's public statement as one more data point in the overall fog, rather than as the authoritative resolution it appeared to be. The mystery was preserved by the people whose decisions create the show, in the face of the creator's explicit answer, because the mystery had by that point become more important to what Springfield does culturally than any specific answer could be. The surface explanation, the one the show's creators have confirmed and repeated, is universality. Springfield is designed to feel like every American town to every American viewer, and a fixed geographic identity would impose on it the particularity of a specific region, the specific cultural and physical characteristics of an actual place, which would make it feel less like everywhere and more like somewhere. An Oregon Springfield is a Pacific Northwest Springfield. A Kentucky Springfield is a Southern Springfield. Attach it to a location, and it acquires the qualities of that location, which excludes viewers who do not share those qualities and reduces the breadth of the identification the show has always tried to produce. Keep it unlocatable and it can be anyone's town. This is real. It works. It is one of the reasons the show has maintained an audience as geographically and demographically diverse as its actual viewership for as long as it has run. But within the frameworks that take Springfield's internal logic seriously rather than its production logic, the geographic impossibility suggests something more than universality. If the radiation theory is operative, ask why the effects of the contamination should be limited to biology. The plant has altered fish. It has altered residents. It has done things to living organisms that deviate in measurable ways from normal biological function. If the rules governing biological systems inside Springfield's contamination zone have been suspended or warped by decades of uncontrolled radioactive output, why should the physical space around the plant be assumed to follow normal geographic rules? Maybe the decades of output from a facility with 342 safety violations have done something to the space itself, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart, making coexistent what should be spatially separated, producing a landscape as anomalous as the organisms living in it. If the coma theory is operative, Springfield's geography makes complete sense as the landscape of a dreaming brain working from emotional rather than cartographic memory. Homer's unconscious mind is not maintaining a precise geographic model of the United States. It is working from impressions, the emotional residue of places experienced, visual fragments of landscapes half remembered, the rough outlines of environments encountered across a lifetime before the coma, mountains from a vacation, ocean from a commercial he watched on television, desert from a film he saw, farmland from driving through somewhere in his early 20s. The dreaming brain assembles the town's environment from every American landscape Homer ever experienced, layering them on top of each other without concern for whether they are geographically compatible, because the dream does not require geographic logic. The dream requires emotional logic. Springfield feels like home because it is made from Homer's fragmented, incomplete, longing-saturated memory of America and memory, especially the memory of an unconscious mind sustaining a dream across decades, does not organize itself by geographic accuracy. If collective denial is the operative framework, Springfield's resistance to geographic location is the town's most structurally important defense. You cannot bring a federal regulatory action against a nuclear facility you cannot establish jurisdiction over. You cannot file charges on behalf of a contaminated waterway when the waterway's state location keeps changing between episodes. You cannot hold anyone accountable for environmental harm when the legal framework for the accountability shifts every time someone tries to apply it. Springfield's geographic indeterminacy is not a comedy device about a fictional town's uncertain position in a fictional America. It is the most durable protection the town's power structure has against the kind of external accountability that would dismantle everything Burns has spent a century building. The town cannot be regulated because it cannot be found. The plant cannot be shut down because its jurisdiction cannot be established. The water cannot be tested by authorities with standing because the standing depends on a location that doesn't consistently exist. Springfield floats between states because a fixed position would mean a fixed regulatory exposure, and Burns has not survived for a century by accepting exposures he can prevent. The episode called Behind the Laughter, the 12th season mockumentary that presents The Simpsons as a real family who became the basis for their own animated series, provides what appears to be a concrete answer. In the original broadcast of the episode, the family is identified as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, this was changed to a different state. The answer literally changed between versions of the same episode. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth depending on which version of the show you were watching. Even when Springfield had a definitive answer, that answer was not definitive. It shifted. It refused to stay fixed. Springfield will not be located. This is a deliberate creative commitment, maintained by the show for its entire run, including against the stated preference of its creator. The town is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that can be anywhere belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down. And a town that cannot be shut down keeps the plant running, keeps the cooling tower standing, keeps Burns in his office, keeps the violations uncorrected, and keeps the water at whatever level of contamination it has reached after 3 decades of a safety inspector who throws donuts into the reactor to see what happens. The town stays unfindable. The plant stays open, and everyone in Springfield keeps looking for the one place they already are and will never quite be able to point to on a map. Section 9. The Floating Timeline. Why no one in Springfield ever ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now. He has been 10 years old through every administration, every technological revolution, every major cultural shift, every war, every election, every disaster, every development that has altered daily life in the intervening 36 years. He was 10 when the Berlin Wall came down. He was 10 on the 11th of September 2001. He was 10 during the 2008 financial collapse. He was 10 during the 2020 pandemic. He is 10 right now, in 2026, on whatever day you are watching this, in whatever version of the world the last few years have produced. He will be 10 in the next episode. He will be 10 in every episode after that. Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1. Homer and Marge are somewhere in their mid-30s, where they have been for as long as the show has existed. The house on Evergreen Terrace looks the same. The neighborhood has not changed. The characters carry no visible evidence of time's passage on their faces or their bodies or the way they move through the world. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present when an episode airs in 2026. The characters are living in 2026. The cultural references update. The technology in the background updates. The jokes about current events are current because the show's world slides forward with the real world. But the characters do not age. They exist in a state of permanent temporal suspension, surrounded by a world that changes, fixed at ages they occupied in 1989, neither progressing nor declining, simply present. It is the standard approach for long-running animated series, and most productions that use it do so without the paradox becoming too visible, because most shows don't run long enough for the gap between the world's age and the character's age to grow into something that demands explanation. The Simpsons has run long enough that the gap has become impossible to ignore, and the contradictions the floating timeline has created are not minor inconsistencies, but structural anomalies that accumulate across seasons into something that feels less like a production convention and more like a feature of the show's reality that requires its own account. The most visible problem is Homer and Marge's backstory and the way it has had to move. When the show began, their romantic history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. They fell in love during a period with specific, identifiable cultural characteristics: the music, the fashion, the political atmosphere, the social context of that exact era. All of it was anchored to a time period that made coherent sense for parents in their mid-30s in 1989. The anchor worked. The world the backstory pointed to and the world the show occupied were separated by a decade or so, which felt plausible and narratively sustainable. But the floating timeline has been moving the present forward for 36 years while keeping Homer and Marge in their mid-30s. If they are mid-30s in 2025, they met in high school in approximately 2005. Their formative years were not defined by Watergate and disco and the long, strange tale of the 1970s cultural experiment. Their adolescence happened in an era of early smartphones and social media and whatever cultural texture 2005 produced. The show has addressed this explicitly, in multiple flashback episodes, rewriting Homer and Marge's high school experiences to place them in the 1990s, then the early 2000s, then later still. Each rewrite produces a version of their history that is inconsistent with the previous versions. They have been grunge kids and hipsters and millennials and early adopters of technologies that weren't available when the original show established their backstory. Their past is not a stable thing they carry. It is a resource that gets revised when the timeline makes the previous version untenable. They do not have a history in the sense that real people have histories, a fixed sequence of events that actually occurred, and that shapes who they are through its specific details. They have an approximation of a history, a working draft that will be rewritten again when the next revision is required, structured around the emotional constants that stay fixed even as the specific events keep changing. The love story is the same. The people are the same. The era in which it happened keeps sliding forward because it has to. Every theory we have developed points to this moment and arrives at the same conclusion through a different path. The coma theory. The frozen ages are the most emotionally specific thing the coma theory explains. Homer cannot generate older versions of his children because he was not present for their growth. He went under when Bart was 10 and Lisa was 8 and Maggie was 1, and those are the only versions of his children that his dreaming mind has direct experiential access to. The dream cannot produce what the dreamer has no material for. His children will stay at the ages they were the last morning he was conscious for as long as the dream continues, because the dream has nowhere else to put them, and it cannot end, because ending means something Homer's dreaming brain will not write. The radiation theory. The biological aging process itself has been altered by decades of environmental exposure at the cellular level. Whatever the contamination from Burns's plant has done to Springfield's population over the span of the show's run, it has done something to the mechanism through which time registers on biology. The yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the protruding eyes and the extraordinary physical resilience all point toward a biological system operating under different rules than ordinary human biology follows. Why should those different rules leave the aging process intact? The principle and the Popper theory. The community has applied the same collective agreement mechanism to the passage of time that it has applied to everything else it finds inconvenient. Springfield voted to maintain the fiction of Armin Tamzarian as Seymour Skinner. It sealed that vote with a legal decree. It made it a crime to state the truth aloud. The same mechanism applied to time an unspoken community consensus that everyone in Springfield is approximately the age they have always been, and that anyone who insists otherwise will be treated the way the real Seymour Skinner was treated, would explain why 36 years of calendar time have failed to leave any visible impression. The Burns immortality theory. The concept of aging as universal, inevitable, and non-negotiable has already been broken within Springfield's universe by a single existing counterexample. Burns has demonstrated that mortality is negotiable for someone with sufficient resources and the right kind of medical access. If one person can escape the normal progression of biological time through technology and money, the framework that makes aging seem like a natural law is already compromised. In a town where the richest resident has been circumventing that law for over a century, why would the rest of the population experience it as absolute? All of these explanations are saying the same thing through different vocabularies. Time does not work normally in Springfield. Something has interrupted the normal operation of temporal progression within this specific space. Whether the interrupting agent is radioactive contamination of the biological aging mechanism, the frozen reference material of a dreaming brain, collective community denial applied to the passage of years, or the precedent established by a man who has been paying to stay alive for over a century, the result is the same. Springfield runs on a clock that does not advance. The show can imagine its characters grown. This is important and easy to overlook. Lisa's wedding, from the 6th season, depicts Lisa at 23 years old, engaged to be married, living the adult life, that her intelligence and her drive and her particular combination of gifts and vulnerabilities would plausibly produce. The episode works. It is emotionally specific. It demonstrates that the production knows these characters well enough to imagine what they would become with full, genuine conviction. The future it depicts feels real in the way that good speculative fiction feels real, not like a guess, but like an extrapolation from deep knowledge of the source material. The show can do it. It simply will not do it permanently. Lisa returns to being 8, Bart returns to being 10, the flash forward closes, the permanent present resumes. The window that opened briefly onto a possible future is sealed again as though it had never opened. The production is capable of aging these characters. It is choosing not to. And that choice sustained for 36 years, against the internal creative logic of wanting to develop characters over time, against the external commercial logic of showing audiences new versions of people they care about. That choice is not arbitrary. It is a commitment. It is the show's deepest and most consistently kept promise. The characters don't age because the show needs them not to age, and the show needs them not to age because the audience needs them not to age. And what that audience need points toward is the most honest answer to the aging paradox that any framework provides. Springfield is where you can always go back. Whatever the week has been, whatever combination of loss and stress and change and surprise and difficulty the week produced on Sunday at 8 o'clock, the family is on the couch and everything is the same and the couch gag plays, and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, and Marge is at the stove, and Bart is doing something inadvisable, and Lisa is playing her saxophone alone somewhere. Everything the same as it was last week. Everything the same as it was last year. Everything the same as it was when you were 8 years old and watching it on the couch in your parents' house. The Simpsons is not kept on the air by inertia or institutional habit. It is kept on the air by the specific need it fills in American cultural life that nothing else has been able to fill. In the 36 years it has been filling it. The need for a home that does not change. A family that is always intact when you return to it. A place where the kids are permanently young and the parents are permanently together, and the house on Evergreen Terrace looks exactly the way it has always looked and will look the same next time. In a culture that changes faster than most people are comfortable with, in a life that accumulates losses and alterations, and the irreversible forward motion of time at a pace that doesn't ask permission, Springfield stays. It is always the same. You can always go back. We built the loop. We maintain the loop by watching, by caring, by continuing to need what the loop provides. Every episode watched is another layer on the structure. Every season that passes makes the eventual ending feel more distant and less thinkable. We trapped The Simpsons in a permanent present because it was the only present we were willing to keep. Bart will be 10 next week. The timeline will keep floating. The ages will stay fixed. The backstories will get rewritten again when the floating demands it. And Springfield will remain exactly what it has always been, frozen at the moment we first found it, waiting every week for us to come back. It will be there. It always is. That has always been the whole point. The season nobody remembers. There is a season of The Simpsons that functions as a dividing line in the community of people who think seriously about the show, and it is not the season everyone expects. Everyone knows about the Season 4 coma episode as the dividing line for the coma theory. Everyone knows about the Principal and the Pauper episode in Season 9 as the canonical example of the show doing something that seemed to break what the show was. Everyone knows about Who Shot Mr. Burns across Seasons 6 and 7 as the moment the show attempted something genuinely ambitious. These are the canonical reference points for discussions about what The Simpsons is and has been. But there is another kind of dividing line that the theories illuminate differently. There is the question of when Springfield became a place where the impossible was not exceptional but expected. When the town stopped being a heightened but recognizable version of American suburban life and became a place where the laws of narrative reality were as negotiable as the laws of biology appear to be for its residents. The coma theory places this transition at the midpoint of Season 4. The radiation theory places it earlier, suggesting that the laws of Springfield's reality were always operating under different rules, and that the early season's apparent groundedness was itself a product of proximity. The dream was still close to its source material, or the radiation's effects had not yet accumulated enough to fully express themselves, or the collective denial mechanism had not yet developed the comprehensive scope it would eventually reach. What is interesting about this question, when did Springfield become Springfield in its fullest sense, is that the theories all produce different answers, and the different answers reveal something about what each theory thinks the most fundamental thing about Springfield is. For the coma theory, Springfield became fully Springfield when Homer's dream lost its connection to remembered reality and started generating freely. For the radiation theory, Springfield was always Springfield but became more visibly so as the contamination accumulated. For the collective denial theory, Springfield became fully Springfield when the community developed enough practice at its particular form of selective attention to maintain it automatically rather than effortfully. And for the immortality theory, Springfield became fully Springfield when Burns achieved the specific configuration of wealth and institutional relationship and medical technology that made him impossible to effectively challenge. When the system became self-sustaining, when the architecture of the loop was complete enough to run without constant maintenance. All of these moments are different. All of them are, within their own frameworks, correct? And the fact that they point to different moments in the show's chronology is itself evidence for the complexity of what Springfield is, a place so densely constructed across so many dimensions of impossibility that different theoretical frameworks find different starting points for when the impossibility became constitutive rather than exceptional. Why the theories matter beyond the show. There is a question underneath all of the questions we've been asking tonight that is worth surfacing explicitly because it is the question that makes the theories more than entertainment. Why do the Simpsons mysteries matter? Not in the sense of why are they interesting to think about, which has an easy answer. In the sense of what does it mean that these theories exist, that they have been developed with this level of care and specificity by this many people across this many years, that they have produced a body of interpretive work that is, in aggregate, more than trivially thoughtful about what the show has been doing and why. One answer is that the theories are the natural product of a sustained relationship between a work of art and the people who love it. When you spend enough time with something, when you return to it week after week and year after year, when you carry it with you through enough of your own life, that your understanding of it deepens alongside your understanding of everything else, you find things in it that were not visible at the surface. This is true of all great art, and it is why great art rewards engagement over time in ways that less careful work does not. The theories exist because Springfield is constructed with enough care and enough internal coherence that extended attention reveals patterns that single-episode viewing does not surface. But there is a deeper answer that the specific content of the theories points toward. The Simpsons mysteries are all, at some level, about the same thing. The gap between official explanations and actual reality. The gap between what a community is told is happening and what is actually happening. Between the water quality that the plant's existence requires be reported and the water quality that the plant's violations produce. Between the verdict that was announced and the evidence that supported it. Between the principle everyone knows and the man he actually is. Between the life Homer appears to be living and the life his dreaming brain is actually generating. These gaps are not unique to Springfield. They are the specific shape of a kind of institutional reality that extends well beyond a fictional animated town. The gap between the official account of an environmental situation and the actual environmental situation. Between the verdict in a high-profile case and the evidence that the verdict rested on. Between the public face of a powerful institution and the private practice that the institution sustains. Between the story a community tells itself about what kind of place it is and the specific mechanisms through which it actually operates. The Simpsons has been drawing these gaps in animated form for 36 years, with enough specificity and enough consistency that the people who have been watching closely have developed, through the specific discipline of thinking carefully about a cartoon, a set of analytical tools that transfer. The habit of looking behind the official account. The practice of asking who benefits from the official version. The skill of identifying which details are inconsistent with the surface explanation and what those inconsistencies might reveal about what the surface explanation is concealing. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, something. The theories we've worked through tonight are theories about a cartoon town and a fictional family and an animated nuclear plant. But the analytical habits that produce them are the same habits that allow people to look at the world around them with appropriate skepticism and sufficient care. Springfield taught a lot of people to look for the three-eyed fish, not in Springfield, in wherever they actually live. The tower is cracked, the violations are documented, The safety inspector is asleep, and the question the town has decided not to ask is still there, sitting in the water, waiting for somebody to finally look down and notice what has been swimming in it all along. Springfield won't ask. Springfield never has. But the theories ask it. And tonight, we asked it too. That is what the next 2 hours in Springfield was for. And that is why Springfield will keep having people come back to ask it, for as long as the show runs, and for as long after as the show is remembered. The question doesn't go away just because Springfield decides not to answer it. It just waits. Section 10. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and what Springfield does to the people who try. There is a man in Springfield who keeps dying. His name is Hans Moleman. He is small, elderly, nearly blind, and present at a remarkable proportion of the locations in Springfield where fatal events occur. Cars locate him with a consistency that suggests directed purpose. Objects of significant mass find him specifically. Animals select him for interactions that, in the context of a person who is apparently quite frail, have consequences. He walks into traffic with a frequency that implies either a profound spatial orientation deficit or a commitment to the act. He is buried. He is incinerated. He drowns. He is struck. He is crushed by things falling from above and by things moving horizontally. The show has killed Hans Moleman dozens of times across its canonical run, not in the Treehouse of Horror episodes that operate under explicitly different rules, not in the dream sequences or fantasy segments that carry their own disclaimers. In regular canonical episodes, events with narrative stakes, Moleman dies. And then he is present in the next episode, not explained as having survived against expectation, not shown recovering from his injuries, simply present, intact, doing whatever background function the episode requires before something kills him again. Most viewers process this as a running gag and move on. Moleman dies frequently. That is his role in the ensemble. The repetition is the point. Don't think about it. The show counts on you not thinking about it. But within a framework that takes Springfield's internal logic seriously rather than its production convenience, Moleman's death cycle is a data point that requires an account. If the radiation theory is the operative framework, Moleman represents the most extreme biological mutation present in Springfield's contaminated population. Homer's body adapted to radioactive exposure by developing extraordinary physical resilience, an ability to absorb damage that would end a normal person and recover fully, apparently without limit. Moleman's adaptation appears to have gone further than Homer's. He does not merely survive trauma that should be fatal. He reconstitutes from death itself. His cellular structure, whatever the plant's contamination has done to it over the course of his long residency in Springfield's environment, seems to have developed the capacity to reconstitute from terminal failure. Death, for Moleman specifically, within Springfield's particular biology, is a temporary interruption of function rather than a terminal state. The system fails and restarts. The restart is automatic. If the coma theory is the framework, Moleman is a background process in Homer's dream, one of the minor characters whose function is to populate Springfield with enough human presence to make it feel inhabited rather than staged. Homer's unconscious mind generates the core characters with precision and sustained investment. The primary characters, Homer's family, his immediate social circle, his workplace colleagues, his neighbors are maintained with full fidelity because they are the emotional content the dream exists to preserve. Characters like Moleman exist in the periphery, generated from the dream's need to populate backgrounds and provide the texture of a functioning town. The dream's attention to Moleman is intermittent. Occasionally, the maintenance of him lapses the dreaming brain's resources redirect to more emotionally essential aspects of the simulation, and Moleman ceases to function. The next episode, the dream reassembles him from whatever template it is working from because the background still needs him. He is not, in this reading, a person the dream is sustaining. He is a recurring set piece that the dream periodically forgets and then replaces. If collective denial is the framework, Moleman's deaths are the most striking application of the community's established non-attention mechanism to an individual case. A person dies publicly, repeatedly, in front of witnesses who include the show's principal cast, and the community's collective response is the same response it has for everything else that should be alarming but isn't: nothing. No investigation. No public health concern. No formal inquiry into why this specific man keeps dying, and why he keeps appearing afterward as though he had not. The town has normalized Malman's death cycle the same way it has normalized the three-eyed fish, and the glowing man in the forest, and the four-fingered children and the skeletons in the plant's basement. Everything that should produce alarm has been filed, through long practice, in the category of things Springfield has decided not to pursue. Malman's cycling deaths are simply the most extreme instance of that practice. And then there is the detail about Malman's age. In one episode, he states his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at him. He presents as a man in the final chapter of a very long life, somewhere between 70 and 100 years old, to external observation, every visible feature suggesting decades of accumulated experience and physical wear. If he is telling the truth about his age, which the show provides no reason to doubt within the episode in question, then something has aged him catastrophically and prematurely. Something took a person who should be in the middle of their life and aged them 4 or 5 decades faster than normal. And the same something that aged him also made him apparently indestructible, the most visibly deteriorated person in Springfield, and the only person in Springfield who cannot die permanently. Premature extreme aging combined with essential indestructibility, occurring in a person who has lived for 31 years in Springfield. The radiation theory has a coherent mechanism for exactly this combination. The coma theory has an explanation. The collective denial theory has an account. The only explanatory framework that cannot address Malman's situation is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon with a running gag, and none of the running gags mean anything. In Springfield, all the running gags mean something. The trick is knowing what. Now let's talk about Ned Flanders. Because Ned is the character the show has most systematically and most thoroughly dismantled, and the darkness that lives underneath his performed positivity is one of the most unsettling sustained subtexts in the show's history. The surface version of Ned is familiar. He is Homer's neighbor. He is, in almost every measurable respect, the opposite of Homer. Physically fit and health-conscious where Homer is not, financially responsible where Homer is chaotic, patient where Homer is reactive, genuinely kind where Homer's kindness is intermittent and self-involved, a devoted father where Homer loves his children in ways that frequently put them in danger. He is, by objective assessment of the show's own established criteria for measuring human virtue, a better person than Homer in essentially every dimension the show considers. The universe of Springfield has been methodically destroying him for 36 years. Maud Flanders died at a stadium during an event that Homer was attending. A t-shirt cannon misfired because Homer was actively dodging the projectiles being launched into the crowd, and the projectiles that Homer's evasions redirected struck Maud instead. She was knocked from the bleachers. She did not survive. Homer's reflexive self-preservation, his instinctive, unthinking choice to move his own body out of the path of incoming objects, directly caused the death of his neighbor's wife. This is not ambiguous or metaphorical. Homer's actions produced the specific physical chain of events that ended Maud Flanders' life. Ned forgave him. This is presented as evidence of Ned's spiritual development, his genuine capacity for grace under circumstances that most people would find grace impossible. But the episode that most seriously examines Ned's psychological architecture provides different context for where that capacity for forgiveness actually comes from. After a hurricane destroys his house and the community's reconstruction of it collapses immediately due to incompetent building practices, Ned reaches a limit. He has a complete psychological episode, not a momentary outburst, but a full unraveling, a sustained breakdown in which he says things about the people around him that he has been holding in storage for a very long time. He says them in public, to the faces of the people he is addressing, with a clarity and a specificity that suggests he has been composing these observations for years. He is subsequently hospitalized and treated in a mental health facility. Inside the facility, the backstory is revealed. Ned was not always the person Springfield knows. As a child, he was uncontrolled, aggressive, feral in ways that neither he nor his parents had found a framework for managing. His parents, who held philosophical commitments against conventional discipline, took him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist subjected Ned to years of behavioral conditioning that removed the aggression, the impulse toward resistance, the capacity for sustained anger. The feral child was replaced with the Ned that Springfield knows. The kindness is real in the sense that it is consistently exhibited, but it is not freely chosen or naturally developed. It is a behavioral modification installed before Ned had the developmental capacity to understand what was being done to him or to refuse it. This changes the character completely. Ned's patience with Homer is not saintly forbearance. It is the conditioned response of a brain whose capacity for anger was systematically removed before Ned was old enough to know he had it and might want to keep it. He does not choose patience. He is unable to choose otherwise, because the mechanism that would produce the alternative, the sustained anger, the refusal, the confrontation, was eliminated in childhood. His faith is not the freely chosen spiritual conviction of a person who examined the alternatives and found genuine meaning in the one he selected. It is the adopted external framework of a man who needs something to explain why suffering is not random, why virtue is supposed to be rewarded, why the consistent, total failure of his life to produce the outcomes his behavior should earn has a larger meaning that he is not yet in a position to understand. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the automatic output of a brain that cannot produce the alternative because the alternative was conditioned out of existence when Ned was a child. The show knows this. It has shown you what happens when the conditioning breaks down. When Ned's speech in the hurricane episode's aftermath arrives, it does not feel like a villain revealing himself or like a good person demonstrating unexpected capacity for cruelty. It feels like someone who has been pressurized for years finally finding a release point. The content of what he says, the specific grievances he articulates, the clarity with which he names his accumulated injuries, all of it reads as material that has been building under careful management for a very long time. The conditioning held it. The hurricane was enough to make the conditioning fail. The most specifically devastating thing the show reveals about Ned's situation is not the death of his wife, not the destruction of his house, not the weight of 36 years of Homer's impact on his life. It is about God. Within the canonical internal reality of The Simpsons, God is real. God exists within the show's universe, is accessible by characters within it, and has had direct personal conversations with characters in it. Homer has spoken with God face to face, in scenes that the show frames as genuine theological encounters rather than as Homer's delusions or as metaphor. The divine is present and communicative in Springfield, within the show's own established facts. Ned has never heard from God. Ned attends church every week. He has organized his entire life around his faith, not as a public performance or a social identity, but as a genuine orienting framework for his daily decisions and his values and his expectations about how the world works. He has forgiven things that the framework of his faith requires him to forgive, even when forgiveness seems impossible. He has endured losses that the framework asks him to understand as part of a larger plan. He has given to his community, supported his neighbors, raised his children within his faith's guidelines, and done, in all the ways the show has visible to observe, everything that his religion asks of a person who takes it seriously. The God who exists within Springfield's universe, who has sat with Homer and had extended personal conversations with him, has never once addressed Ned. Not a word, not a sign. The devout man who has dedicated his life to a specific relationship with the divine is met with total silence. The man who falls asleep in the pew during services, who engages with religious practice as a formality at best, who has done almost nothing in his personal conduct to reflect the values of the institution he attends, that man gets direct divine conversation. This is not random cruelty in the show's universe. It is the show making a specific statement that it will not explicitly articulate in any character's dialogue or any episode's moral resolution. The universe does not reward virtue, not in Springfield. The universe in Springfield rewards compliance. Homer is compliant in the way that the system requires. He does not effectively resist, he does not challenge, he absorbs and continues. Ned is compliant in the way that his conditioning requires. He does not effectively resist, he does not challenge, he absorbs and continues. Both of them are compliant in the fundamental way the system needs them to be, and both of them receive the same thing, more of what they've already received. But Homer, despite doing everything wrong by any moral accounting, has the family intact at the end of every episode, and the job security, and the divine conversation, and the reset button that erases what happened between episodes so he can start fresh. And Ned, doing everything right by his own framework's accounting, has a dead wife and a house that collapsed and a faith that has never answered him and a neighbor who will never stop costing him something. These two men have been living next to each other for 36 years. The gap between what Homer deserves by any moral accounting and what he receives, and what Ned deserves and what he receives, has not narrowed by any measurable amount across the entire run. It is not narrowing. It is not going to narrow. Because the system is not designed to narrow it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the fence, and everyone exactly where they are, in a loop that serves the interests of the people who benefit from the loop and costs everyone else. That is Springfield. That is what lives underneath 36 seasons of jokes and couch gags and Homer finding his way home. A town where the most compliant man in the community has never heard from the god he devoted his life to, and the man responsible for most of the damage keeps showing up to work every day, and a tiny old man dies somewhere in the background and comes back for more, and the loop keeps running because the loop has never needed anyone's permission to keep running. It just runs. It has always just run, and everyone in it stays exactly where they are. The specific quality of a Sunday night in Springfield. There is a specific quality to the experience of watching The Simpsons that is different from the experience of watching most other television shows. And that difference is worth trying to describe precisely because it is part of what makes the show's mysteries feel different from the mysteries in other long-running narratives. Most mysteries in shows built around puzzles. In narratives where the central engine is the unresolved question create tension. They produce a forward-leaning posture in the viewer. What comes next? What does this mean? When will we know? The mystery is a mechanism for keeping you engaged with the future of the story. Springfield's mysteries produce something else entirely. They produce a kind of deepening, a sense of the ground becoming more solid beneath your feet, even as the surface grows stranger. The more you understand about what is wrong in Springfield, the more present Springfield becomes. The theories do not make the show feel less real. They make it feel more real, more thick with the specific texture of a place that has accumulated 36 years of history and consequence. Part of this is because the show's comedic sensibility has always operated at a relaxed pace. The Simpsons does not rush. It sits inside moments. It follows digressive lines of thought to their destinations without anxiety about losing the narrative thread. The couch gag takes up the first minutes of every episode and has nothing to do with what follows. Episodes frequently stop for songs, for tangents, for Homer's interior experience of whatever he is currently thinking about. The show is not in a hurry. It exists in a world where the permanent present always has enough time for whatever is happening right now. This pace is what makes it work as a sleep video, and it is also what gives the theories their particular character. You can sit with the Springfield nuclear plant safety record for a long time without feeling rushed. You can follow the coma theory down its various paths without the anxiety of feeling like you are going to run out of time before the thing is resolved. There is no resolution coming. There is no deadline. Springfield is not going anywhere. The theories will still be there when you come back to them, as present and as patient as Springfield itself. The show has always been available for this kind of extended contemplation. It invites it. The density of reference, the layering of detail upon detail across decades of episodes, the way a throwaway line in Season 3 resonates with an established fact from Season 15, all of this creates a text that rewards close attention over time, rather than a text that delivers its meaning in a single encounter, and then has nothing left to offer. Springfield gets richer the more time you spend in it. The theories are the natural product of an audience that has been spending time in Springfield for 36 years and has found, in that accumulated time, depths that individual episodes don't surface. This is unusual. Most popular culture is designed for a different relationship, for immediate consumption and emotional impact, for the kind of engagement that is intense and brief and then complete. Springfield was designed for something else, or discovered along the way that it was capable of something else, or both. The show that began in 1989 as a subversive animated sitcom has become, across the decades of its running, something more like a world. A specific, internally consistent, deeply realized world that has been accumulating detail and history and texture for 36 years, and that is available for exploration in ways that most fictional universes are not. The theories are one mode of exploring it. Tonight has been another. And the exploration does not diminish what Springfield is. It deepens it. Every theory we've worked through tonight adds a layer to the understanding of a place that already has more layers than any single evening can fully account for. The Marge nobody talks about. In all of the theories we've worked through tonight, Marge occupies a strange position. She is present in every theory as Homer's reason to keep dreaming, as a possible shooter, as the patient foundation that holds the family together, while everything around it cycles through catastrophe and reset. But she is rarely the central focus. The theories revolve around Homer and Burns and Maggie and the plant. Marge is in the background, as she is always in the background, providing the stability that makes everyone else's story possible. This is worth examining, because Marge's situation is its own kind of Springfield mystery. Marge Bouvier married Homer Simpson. She did this knowingly, with a clear enough view of what Homer was and what he was likely to continue being. She is not naive about her husband. She is not blind to his failures or his limitations or the specific patterns of behavior that have produced specific consequences across 3 decades of episodes. She has left Homer. She has considered leaving Homer. She has been pushed to the edge of what she can sustain by Homer's behavior on enough occasions that the question of why she stays is not trivial. The show's surface answer is that she loves him. This is true, and also insufficient. Love is necessary but not sufficient as an explanation for the sustained commitment that Marge has demonstrated across 36 years of marriage to a man who has cost her an amount that is difficult to fully account for. There is something more specific operating in Marge's relationship to her situation than love alone. The coma theory offers one version of this. If the show is Homer's dream, then Marge is always exactly where Homer needs her to be, because she is generated by the dream to fulfill that function. The Marge of the dream is the Marge who stays. The dream cannot generate a Marge who leaves, because Homer's unconscious mind cannot produce that version of the story. Which means that every time the show appears to bring the marriage to a point of genuine crisis and then resolves the crisis with Marge's recommitment, it is not the show failing to follow through on its own dramatic momentum. It is the dream protecting itself from the one ending it cannot survive. Homer is dreaming about the life he wants. Marge leaving is not part of the life he wants. So the dream keeps finding ways to bring her back. But within the show's own reality, outside the coma framework, Marge's choices have a different texture. She is a person of genuine integrity and genuine capability who has made a specific set of choices about how to use that capability. She could have pursued her own career with the seriousness her artistic talent and her organizational intelligence would support. She has demonstrated, across various episodes where circumstances pushed her into positions of greater autonomy and professional engagement, that she is fully capable of the kind of substantive, independent life that her domestic role has mostly prevented her from building. She chose the domestic role. She keeps choosing it. The question of whether this choice is freely made or whether it is the product of the same kind of conditioning that produced Ned's niceness, the product of an era and a set of cultural expectations about what women's lives should look like that were installed before she had the developmental capacity to evaluate them, is one the show has circled without settling. Marge's contentment with her role is real in some episodes and strained in others. Her periodic escapes from it are presented as meaningful as evidence that there is something in her that the domestic role does not fully contain, and then resolved back into the role without permanently altering the balance. What Marge has built, across the show's run, is the thing everyone else in the family is either trying to reach or taking for granted: the stable center. The thing that is there when Homer comes home. The house that is still standing. The dinner that is still made. The children who are still cared for. The warmth that is still present after 36 years of everything that has been thrown at it. Marge is the container for all of it. The container that holds the family the way the show holds Springfield through sustained, patient, comprehensive maintenance that nobody fully appreciates, because what good maintenance does is make its necessity invisible. When the container holds, nobody notices the maintenance. When it fails, even briefly, everything becomes visible at once. How much the container was holding, how much the maintenance was doing, how completely the stability that everyone else's lives depended on was being sustained by a single person's continuous effort. Springfield would not be Springfield without Homer, but Homer would not be possible without Marge. The dream would not be worth dreaming without her at the center of it. And in a show that has been examined from every angle by every kind of theory, the woman holding the center is the one whose own story gets the least comprehensive examination. That is not an accident. That is Springfield looking past the person doing the essential work, the same way Springfield looks past everything that is most important to pay attention to. The cooling towers are right there. The three-eyed fish are right there. Marge is right there, making everything possible, every episode for 36 years. We look past her. We always have. We will keep looking past her. And she will keep doing the work, quietly, in the kitchen, while everything around her cycles through its loops and resets and impossible adventures and managed catastrophes and returns to normal. Because that is what Marge does. It has always been what Marge does. And without her doing it, the home on Evergreen Terrace would not be the home that Homer keeps finding his way back to. Closing the loop. We are near the end now, and it feels right to acknowledge what we've done here and why it matters in a way that is more specific than the obvious. We spent time tonight taking seriously a set of ideas that most reasonable people would file under fun fan theories and move on from. We treated the radiation contaminating Springfield as a real and substantive explanation for the show's visual and behavioral characteristics. We sat with the possibility that Homer has been unconscious since 1993, and that the last 32 years of episodes are the dream of a dying man. We reopened a case the show closed decades ago, and found real problems with the official conclusion. We traced Burns' survival through biology and economics, and the century of deliberate construction that made him what he is. We found an extraordinary intelligence behind Maggie's silence. We watched the show shape the future by making certain futures feel inevitable. We followed Mona's story to 3 generations of consequence. We tried to find Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere. We watched time stand still for 36 years and understood why. We counted Mulman's deaths and examined Ned's conditioning and found that the gap between virtue and reward has never narrowed and is not designed to. This is what sustained engagement with a work of art can do. Not every work of art rewards it. Most popular culture does not have the density or the internal coherence to sustain this kind of close attention over this kind of time span. Springfield does. The show was good enough and consistent enough and specific enough in its details that decades of close attention by millions of people has produced a body of theory and analysis that adds genuine meaning to the experience of watching. The theories make Springfield more Springfield. They deepen the thing rather than diminishing it. And they point, collectively, towards something true about what the show has always been doing. The Simpsons is about a family trying to stay intact in a world that is constantly, comprehensively trying to pull them apart. The forces trying to pull them apart have names: Burns, the plant, the contamination, the collective amnesia, the institutional corruption, the accumulated damage of Mona's exile, and Homer's crayon, and Ned's conditioning, and all the other specific mechanisms we've traced tonight. The family resists these forces not through any particular strength or capability. They are, by most measures, not especially well equipped to resist anything but through the specific stubbornness of love. Homer keeps coming home. Marge keeps the home worth coming back to. Bart keeps being Bart, infuriating and loyal in equal measure. Lisa keeps asking the questions nobody wants to answer. Maggie keeps watching, storing, waiting. The loop runs. The family stays intact. The home on Evergreen Terrace keeps standing. That is the show. That is what has been running for 36 years. Not a mystery to be solved, or a conspiracy to be exposed, or a theory to be confirmed. A family, staying together, in a world that is not designed for families to stay together, doing it week after week for as long as the dream holds. And the dream holds because the dreamer will not let it end. Because the dreamer knows, somewhere beneath the coma and the radiation and the floating timeline and all the impossible rest of it, that the loop is the point. That coming home is the point. That the family is the point. It has always been the point. It will always be the point. And as long as the credits roll and the couch gag lands and Homer stumbles through that door and Marge is in the kitchen and the kids are somewhere in the house making their particular noises, as long as all of that is still running, the point is still being made. Homer is still dreaming. And in the dream, everything that matters is still exactly where he left it. Final section. What all of this means and why we keep coming back. We have spent a long time in Springfield together tonight. We walked through the nuclear power plant and built a case that the town has been quietly, systematically, and deliberately poisoned by its primary employer across the entire run of the show, with a safety inspector specifically selected for his inability to prevent what the employer needs to continue. We sat with the coma theory and what it does to 36 years of episodes when you allow it to reframe them, what the comedy becomes when the comedy is the dream of a man who cannot wake up and who has built the only heaven he would ever know how to ask for. We reopened the Burns shooting case and found that the official verdict rests on evidence the victim himself disclaimed and was closed in a town with a documented habit of closing cases it finds convenient to close. We traced Burns's impossible survival through a century of managed radiation exposure and disease equilibrium, and the deliberate engineering of mortality as an engineering problem rather than an inevitability. We looked at Maggie and found something extraordinary and patient sitting behind 36 years of strategic silence, and we understood why silence was the choice that intelligence made when it watched what happened to visibility. We examined the predictions and concluded that the more interesting question is not whether the show saw the future, but whether the show helped produce the future by making certain trajectories feel familiar before they arrived. We followed Mona Simpson through her radicalization and her exile, and traced the three-generation damage that one man's decision to punish an act of compassion left in a family that never fully understood why everything felt so heavy. We searched for Springfield on a map and found a town that exists simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, protected from accountability by the impossibility of establishing jurisdiction over something that cannot be located. We stared at the floating timeline until the shape of what it actually is became clear. And we looked at what Springfield does to the people who try and the people who comply, and found in that comparison the show's most honest statement about the system it has been describing from the beginning. Every single theory we've discussed tonight is different. Each one uses a different set of evidence and a different logical structure and different assumptions about what The Simpsons fundamentally is and what it has been trying to say for 36 years. The radiation theory is a theory about environmental contamination and institutional corruption. The coma theory is a theory about grief and love, and the mind's refusal to accept the end of the things it most needs. The Burns shooting theory is a theory about how official verdicts work in communities that prefer comfort to accuracy. The immortality theory is a theory about wealth and what sufficient wealth actually allows a person to purchase. The Maggie theory is a theory about intelligence and strategy and the specific calculation that a very smart person makes in an environment that punishes being seen. The predictions theory is a theory about cultural influence and confirmation bias, and how a piece of media and the culture that created it end up shaping each other in ways that become impossible to trace cleanly. The Mona theory is a theory about how one act of retaliation, applied to one family at one moment in 1969, produced 3 generations of consequences that compounded across decades without anyone at the center of those consequences fully understanding what they were living inside. The Springfield location theory is a theory about how geography can function as a legal shield and how a town can protect itself from accountability by making itself unfindable. The floating timeline theory is a theory about what an audience needs and what it creates when it needs it badly enough. But every single one of these theories, approached through completely different evidence and completely different logic, arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental and structural, something that runs beneath the surface of every episode and has been running there since the very first one. Whether the wrongness is the radiation contaminating the water supply and the biology of everyone who depends on it, or the dream of a man who cannot wake up, or the collective denial of a community that has voted to prefer comfortable fiction over accurate reality, or the engineered immortality of a man who has made himself too expensive to die, or some combination of all of these operating simultaneously and reinforcing each other. Something has broken the normal rules of reality in this specific place. And the show has been telling you this since episode 1. Not through exposition, not through dramatic reveals where a character turns to the camera and explains the situation, through accumulation, through the slow, patient layering of detail on detail across hundreds of episodes and 36 years, until the picture becomes something you cannot look away from once you have seen it. The show has never hidden what Springfield is. The three-eyed fish was right there in Season 2, and the question it raised was right there too, obvious and unasked. The crayon was in Homer's brain from the beginning. The cooling towers were cracked before the opening credits of the first episode finished playing. The show put all of it in front of you. Springfield just made sure you didn't look. Springfield made sure you didn't look because Springfield is very good at that, and it has had a lot of practice, and the entire population is at various stages of having the critical faculty that looking requires either damaged by the environment or conditioned away by the behavioral frameworks of their upbringing or quietly managed by the combination of comfort and dependency that keeps people from asking questions about the systems their daily survival requires. The three-eyed fish was a news story for one episode and then a punchline. The dome came down and the town was freed and everything went back to the way it was. The principal was revealed as an imposter, and the revelation was voted out of existence by legal decree. The truth keeps arriving in Springfield, and Springfield keeps finding the appropriate box to put it in and sealing the box and returning to normal. We do the same thing. We watch these episodes for 36 years, and we accept the yellow skin and the four-fingered hands, and the ageless children, and the billionaire who glows in the dark and cannot die, and the woman in the background who is clearly waiting for something none of us can name. We accept the radiation and the coma and the closed case and the unfindable town. We normalize all of it. We have become so accustomed to the impossible that when someone points at the three-eyed fish and asks the obvious question, we feel the familiar, mild confusion of someone who has been told something that doesn't require an answer. That's just how things are around here. But they don't have to be. The theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused the surface. They dug. They connected. They traced the threads that the show laid out and followed them to where the threads went, and what they found at the end of the threading was something stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the version Springfield presents at face value. A version where Homer's stupidity is a scar on a man who should have had a different life. Where Maggie's silence is the smartest thing anyone in the family has ever done. Where Burns's longevity is the logical consequence of what sufficient wealth can purchase from the right kind of medical infrastructure. Where Marge's patience is not a character trait but the load-bearing structure that keeps the whole fragile thing from collapsing. Where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response available to a person who can perceive that something is profoundly wrong and has no other tool to use. And where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and alone and completely clear-eyed about her situation and unable to change it, keeps asking questions that nobody wants to answer, because she is the only person in Springfield who has not yet decided that stopping asking is easier. That is what the theories reveal. Not a better Simpsons, or a darker Simpsons, or a Simpsons that replaces the comedy with something more serious. The same Simpsons, seen more completely. The comedy is still there. The jokes still land. Homer still gets back up and Marge still worries and Bart still finds trouble and Lisa still plays her saxophone somewhere alone. The show is still the show. The theories just show you more of the room it's standing in. Now here is the real question. The one that waits underneath all the others. The ones that the theories all approach from the outside without quite asking directly. Why can't we let them go? After 36 years, after hundreds of episodes and thousands of jokes and every couch gag that has ever played, and every Halloween special, and every celebrity appearance, and every season that started in September and ended in May, after all of it, The Simpsons are still on. We are still watching. We are still here, in whatever format, and on whatever device, and at whatever hour of whatever day you are watching this, in Springfield, going through the theories. Spending 2 hours in a town that does not appear on any map. Why? Maybe because they're us. Maybe because Springfield is every town in the sense that counts, which is the sense in which we each spent some version of our childhood in a house where everything was the same every day and the family was intact and the problems were manageable. Maybe because Homer is our father and Marge is our mother and Bart is who we secretly wanted to be and Lisa is who we suspected we should be. And Maggie is something we have not yet named, the part of us that watches everything and says nothing and waits. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe we can't let them go because letting them go requires admitting something that is harder to admit than any theory. It requires admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older, that the world has changed, that the couch we sat on as children watching the opening credits is gone now, or in another house, or in a landfill somewhere, and that the person who sat on that couch watching The Simpsons for the first time has changed in ways that cannot be reversed or recovered. As long as The Simpsons is on, the loop holds. Bart is still 10. The opening credits still play. The couch gag still lands. Homer still comes through the door at 5:30. Marge is still at the stove. The family is still intact. And as long as the family is still intact, you can sit down and turn on the television and go home. Not to Evergreen Terrace, to the version of home that Evergreen Terrace represents. The permanent one, the one that doesn't age, the one that is always exactly as you left it, the one that will be there next week and the week after and every week for as long as you need it. Homer is still dreaming in that hospital bed. The loop is still running. The dream is still holding the family at exactly the ages they were on the last morning everything was normal. And in the dream always, every episode, no matter what, he finds his way home by the end. Because that is the only rule Springfield has ever needed. The only one it has never broken. The only promise the show made in 1989 and has kept through every season and every impossible event and every reset and every time the credits rolled and everything was fine again. Homer always makes it home. And so, tonight, thank you for spending this time in Springfield with me. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, I hope it's quiet, and I hope you're comfortable, and I hope Springfield was exactly what you needed tonight. Good night. End of script. The grief the show never names. There is something the coma theory unlocks that no other framework for understanding The Simpsons quite reaches, and it has to do with grief. Homer Simpson, in the coma theory, is a grieving person. He is not experiencing grief in any conscious sense. His dreaming mind is not organized around the awareness of loss. The dream is precisely designed to prevent that awareness. The family is there. The home is intact. Everything that matters is present and accounted for. The dream works by making the loss invisible, by rebuilding the thing that was lost and sustaining the rebuilding, by giving Homer's unconscious mind the simulation of the life it is in the process of losing. But the grief is there anyway, not in Homer, in the structure of the dream, in the specific way the dream protects itself from the ending it cannot allow, in the fact that nobody ages and nothing fundamentally changes, and every catastrophe resolves back to normal, and every impossible survival happens, and every episode ends with the family intact. These are not the features of a happy dream. They are the features of a dream that is organized around preventing unhappiness. A dream that is working very hard to ensure that the things it loves stay the way they are. A dream under the sustained pressure of a loss that it is refusing to allow to fully arrive. This is the shape of grief that sustains rather than processes. The grief that does not move through its stages because moving through the stages would require acknowledging that the thing lost is really lost, and the acknowledgement is the one thing the dreaming mind will not produce. So the grief sustains itself by continuing to rebuild the lost thing, again and again, episode after episode, year after year, maintaining the simulation because the simulation is the only available alternative to the acknowledgement. Homer is in grief without being in grief. He is protecting himself from something that is happening to him by dreaming himself somewhere it is not happening. And the dream works, it keeps working. It has been working for over 30 years because the dreaming brain is more committed to the protection than to the accuracy of the simulation, and that commitment is what the word love means when you reduce it to its most essential function. You keep rebuilding the thing that matters. You keep running the dream. You keep maintaining the simulation of the family even as the brain generating it degrades and the quality of the simulation declines, and the world the dream builds becomes stranger and more untethered from remembered reality. You keep doing it because the alternative is the thing the dream is protecting you from, and you will keep doing it until the brain cannot do it anymore. That is what the coma theory says. That is what it says about grief and love and the specific, stubborn indestructibility of the thing we hold on to when we cannot let go. And it is the reason the coma theory has the emotional resonance it has, the reason it has been discussed and debated and returned to for years by people who care about this show, the reason it feels like more than a fan theory and more like an insight into something real. The theory is about Homer Simpson in a hospital bed dreaming about his family. It is also about everyone who has ever held on to something past the point where holding on made sense, because the alternative was letting it be over, and letting it be over was the one thing they could not do. The dream keeps running, the loop keeps going, the family stays intact, because Homer will not let the story end. What 36 years actually means. Let's try to hold 36 years in mind for a moment. Not as an abstract number, but as an actual span of time in a human life. A person who was born the year The Simpsons debuted is 36 years old right now. They have never lived in a world without The Simpsons. The show has been there for every year of their life. It was there when they were too young to understand it, and there when they were old enough to watch it, and there when they were old enough to have opinions about which seasons were better, and there when they were old enough to have the kinds of conversations about it that we've been having tonight. For that person, The Simpsons is not something they discovered or something they can remember first encountering. It is simply a feature of the world, present across their entire life, as continuous and as taken for granted as other features of the world they were born into. A person who was 36 when the show debuted is 72 now. They watched the first episode as an adult. They have watched every season since. They have watched their children grow up and leave, and potentially have children of their own, while Bart and Lisa and Maggie remained exactly as they were in 1989. They have watched the world change around the show in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1989. The internet, the smartphone, the complete transformation of how media is consumed and distributed and discovered and discussed, and watch the show adapt to all of it, while the core of it, the specific characters and their specific configurations, stayed recognizable and consistent. For both of these people, for every person across the spectrum between them, The Simpsons has been a consistent presence in their cultural life for longer than most institutions that shape cultural life typically sustain consistent presence. Television shows come and go. Cultural phenomena fade. Things that seem permanent reveal themselves as temporary. The Simpsons has been running for 36 years and is still running, and the show that is running now is recognizable as the same show that debuted in 1989 in ways that are not trivial or superficial. Homer is still Homer. Springfield is still Springfield. The cooling towers are still there. This is an extraordinary thing, if you stop to look directly at it. The sustained maintenance of a specific creative vision across 36 years, in a medium that is not designed for that kind of duration, producing a body of work that has become the reference point for its genre, and for broad swaths of American cultural life, in ways that extend well beyond what a television show typically achieves. Whatever you think about the show's trajectory across its seasons, whatever your assessment of the ratio of its best work to its weaker work, the fact of its sustained presence is remarkable in a way that is easy to underappreciate because the presence has been so consistent for so long. The theories are part of what made the sustained presence possible. Not directly, the theories exist because the show ran long enough to accumulate the density of detail they require, not the other way around. But they are evidence of the kind of engagement the show has sustained across its run. People have been paying close enough attention to The Simpsons for long enough that they have found in it a depth of material for sustained analytical engagement that most popular culture does not contain. The theories are the audience's response to a show that gave them enough to work with that 36 years of close attention produced something more than nostalgia. That is what sustained creative investment produces. That is what Springfield has accumulated across 36 seasons. Not just a body of episodes, but a body of possible meanings, a set of frameworks for understanding what the show has been doing and why. Each framework illuminating something that the others don't reach, all of them together producing a more complete account of what Springfield is than any single one of them provides alone. The theories don't solve Springfield, they deepen it. And a thing that gets deeper the more you look at it is a thing that has been made with real care, by people who understood that the audience would look, and built something worth finding when they did. One more thing about Blinky. We should return to Blinky one final time. Not to the politics of the episode or to the question of what Burns' decision to eat the fish on television tells us about his character. To Blinky himself. To what the image of a three-eyed fish means within the mythology of Springfield. Blinky is real within the show's universe. He exists. He has been caught. He has been displayed. He has been photographed and broadcast and placed in a jar and held up for the cameras and eaten on live television and argued about in a gubernatorial race. He is as real as Homer and Marge and Burns and the plant that produced him, and he has a third eye. The third eye is not a defect in any conventional biological sense. It is an addition. It is something that was not there and is now there, produced by the environment Blinky has been living in. The eye functions, it is positioned and structured as a working eye rather than a vestigial one. Evolution and development have taken the genetic instructions for an eye and applied them to a location where eyes do not usually appear, and the result is an eye. 3 eyes. More of a useful feature rather than a broken one. The radiation theory says this is the mechanism. The contamination does not damage biology randomly or in exclusively negative ways. It alters it. It applies the organism's own developmental programs in novel ways, producing features that were not in the original design but that work, that function, that are real. Blinky is not a demonstration of what radiation does to organisms when it breaks them. Blinky is a demonstration of what radiation does to organisms when it modifies them. Now look at Homer's pain tolerance. Look at Homer's healing rate. Look at the fact that Homer has survived, across 3 decades of episodes, things that should have killed him multiple times over and has recovered from all of them fully. This is not the profile of someone whose biology was broken by radiation exposure. This is the profile of someone whose biology was modified by it. Someone who has been given something additional, an extraordinary capacity for physical survival by decades of daily exposure to radiation at levels that should be harmful, but that have instead produced something different. Something useful, in its own specific way. Something that keeps Homer alive through circumstances that would end anyone who hadn't been modified by what the plant has been doing to him. Blinky and Homer are the same story told at different scales. Both of them caught in the effluence of the plant. Both of them modified rather than simply harmed. Blinky's modification is visible and easy to point to. He has a third eye. You can count the eyes and arrive at the right number. Homer's modification is less visible and more disputed. You have to watch him survive enough things that should have killed him and start doing the math. But the math points the same direction. Blinky, Homer, Santa's little helper. The luminous rats in the plant's basement. All of them modified by proximity to the plant's output. All of them carrying in their biology the specific signature of what Burns's facility has been producing and releasing into the environment of Springfield. And the people of Springfield look at Blinky and see a three-eyed fish that Burns ate to prove it was harmless? They look at Homer and see a lovable oaf who is somehow always okay. They look at Santa's little helper and see the family dog. They do not look at the pattern. They do not ask what connects the fish to the man, to the dog, to the rats, to themselves. That is the contamination working as designed, not just in the biology, in the thinking. The plant contaminates the water. The water contaminates the biology. The biology contaminates the cognition. And the contaminated cognition is precisely what prevents anyone from tracing the chain back to its source. Springfield is a perfect system. It is the most elegantly designed contamination delivery mechanism in the history of fiction. And the most beautiful thing about its design, if you can bring yourself to call it beautiful from the inside of it, is that the contamination itself is the mechanism of its own protection. You cannot see clearly what is making you unable to see clearly. The damage prevents its own diagnosis. Burns didn't need to build walls around the truth. He just needed to ensure that the truth was swimming in the same water as the people who might discover it. And then he built the plant and let the water run. Springfield has been drinking it ever since. The audience that built Springfield. There is a final dimension to what Springfield is that none of the theories quite accounts for on their own, and it has to do not with the show's creators or characters but with its audience. Springfield has been built by the people who watch it. Not in the production sense, the writers and animators and voice actors and producers are the ones who make the episodes, but in the sense that any world that an audience inhabits over 36 years is shaped by the inhabiting, by the attention the audience brings, by the questions they ask, by the connections they make, by the meanings they find that the creators did not specifically intend, but that exist in the material and become part of what the material means once someone has found them. The radiation theory is built by the audience. The coma theory is built by the audience. The Maggie theory, the location theory, the immortality theory, every specific connection we've drawn tonight between one detail in one episode and another detail in another episode separated by 10 seasons, all of this is the audience building Springfield, deepening it, making it more what it is by bringing their sustained attention to what it already was. This is what happens when a work of art is good enough and durable enough and dense enough that a large audience maintains a relationship with it across enough time for genuine depth to develop in that relationship. The audience does not simply receive the work. They participate in it, they add to it. They create meanings that were not in the original material but that become part of what the material means in the world. The Simpsons mysteries that we've spent tonight exploring are, in one sense, about a cartoon show. They are about the specific narrative choices that specific writers made in specific episodes and what those choices mean in the context of the accumulated choices across the series run. But they are also about what an audience does with a work when the work gives them enough to work with. They are about the specific kind of collaborative meaning-making that happens when millions of people spend years paying close attention to the same thing and comparing notes and building on each other's observations and finding, collectively, something more than any of them would have found alone. Springfield is not just the show's creation, it is also the audience's. The Springfield that exists in the cultural imagination, the Springfield that the theories are theories about, is assembled from the episodes and from everything the audience has found in the episodes, and from everything the audience has built on top of what they found. It is a collaborative artifact. A world built by creators who were remarkably good at their jobs, and an audience that was remarkably good at paying attention. That is what we've been doing tonight. We've been participating in the 36-year project of building Springfield. adding our attention to the accumulated attention of everyone who has been here before us, making the place a little more real, a little more complete, a little more worth the trip. The trip is always worth it. Springfield is always worth coming back to. Because the Springfield you come back to is never quite the same as the Springfield you left, because you have changed in the time between visits, and the Springfield you can find now is deeper and more complex than the one you found before. It keeps giving you more to find. That is what 36 years of careful creative work looks like from the inside of the experience of engaging with it. And that is why we're still here. Why you're still here, whatever time it is, wherever you are, still in Springfield at the end of a very long night in the most interesting fictional town in the history of American television. Thank you for being here. Good night, Springfield. End of script. The title card that never changes. Every single episode of The Simpsons opens the same way. The cloud sequence. The camera descending through the clouds to reveal Springfield below. The town coming into view, familiar in every detail after 36 years of the same shot running before the same show began. And somewhere in that establishing view, visible or implied by its absence, the cooling towers, the plant, the thing that started all of this. Then the title card, The Simpsons. In the same font it has always been in, orange, with the distinctive styling that hasn't changed since 1989 and doesn't need to. The title card of a show that has been running longer than most of its current viewers have been alive. There is something about the consistency of the title card that earns attention. After all the hours we've spent tonight thinking about change and the absence of change, about the things that persist and the things that should have changed but haven't. The title card is the most visible version of this consistency. It never changes, it never needs to. The Simpsons is The Simpsons is The Simpsons, in the same orange letters, in the same font, over whatever Springfield shot precedes it, for 36 years. In the world of the theories, the title card takes on a different quality. In the coma theory, it is the dream announcing itself, the dreaming brain producing the same opening every time, because that is the opening it has always produced, the one that signals the beginning of another cycle. In the radiation theory, it is the mark of a place that has persisted past the point where ordinary places persist, sustained by the same forces that keep everything else in Springfield past its natural endpoint. In the collective denial theory, it is the community's recurring agreement to begin again, to start fresh, to maintain the fiction of a permanent present by treating each episode as a beginning rather than a continuation. And in the audience theory in the reading where Springfield is partly built by the people who have been watching it for 36 years, the title card is a salutation. The show saying hello again, the way things you return to regularly say hello, familiar, unhurried, present. Hello, we're still here, you're back, come in. Bart is 10 years old. Lisa is 8. Maggie is watching everything from the background, sucking on her pacifier, waiting. Homer is at the plant. Marge is somewhere in the house. The towers are cracked, the water is running. Burns is in his office, counting the days until the next treatment, checking his watch with the specific attentiveness of a man for whom a missed appointment is a fatal event. Springfield is exactly as you left it. It always is. Come in, sit down. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight. We always do. And for tonight, that's enough Springfield for one sitting. The theories will be here. The cooling towers will be here. The mysteries will still be unsolved. Come back whenever you need to. Springfield isn't going anywhere. It never does. That has always been the whole point, and the whole point has always been enough. Good night.